frustrated. "Step aside, ma'am. This is real Navy business, not a tourist photo op." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez pinned Haley Thompson with a contemptuous stare, his voice cutting through the visitor control center of Pearl Harbor, where more than 20 tourists stood waiting, the metallic scent from the Garrett PD 6500 scanner heavy in the confined space. Matter of fact, Haley calmly placed her handbag on the X-ray conveyor belt, her right hand checking the ID card in her vest pocket with practiced ease, a motion as familiar as breathing, never acknowledging the challenge in his voice. Chief Petty Officer Williams looked up from the duty desk, tapping his pen lightly against his clipboard while observing how Haley naturally stood at position of attention, until the metal detector shrieked 3 times, and Rodriguez's smirk turned into something much more dangerous. Dramatic tone. The piercing alarm cut through the murmur of conversations like a blade. 23 visitors, gasp, turned their heads toward the commotion, parents pulling their children closer, while elderly veterans in the group exchanged knowing glances. The VCC's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the polished linoleum floor, reflecting off the stainless steel barriers that guided the steady stream of daily visitors through Pearl Harbor's most secure entry point. Serious tone. Rodriguez stepped forward, his combat boots clicking against the floor and with deliberate authority. "Ma'am, I need you to step to the side for additional screening," emphasized. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd been waiting all morning for exactly this moment, a chance to demonstrate his vigilance to the growing crowd of onlookers. Haley nodded once, a crisp movement that lasted exactly 1 second. "Copy that," she replied simply, moving to the designated secondary screening area without hesitation. The words came out naturally, professionally, as if she'd responded to countless similar directives throughout her life. The automatic response caught Chief Williams's attention. His weathered hands, marked by 25 years of handling Navy communications equipment, paused their rhythmic tapping. Something about the woman's bearing seemed familiar, though he couldn't place exactly what. She moved with the kind of measured precision that took decades to develop, not the nervous energy typical of civilians encountering military security for the first time. Rodriguez retrieved a handheld metal detector wand from its charging station, the device emitting a soft beep as it powered on. "Arms out to your sides, please, and don't move unless I tell you to." He swept the wand over Haley's shoulders and down her arms, the detector remaining silent until it passed over her left wrist. Beep, beep, beep. "What's this?" Rodriguez demanded, gesturing toward her wrist with the wand. Haley glanced down at the simple digital watch she wore, a black Casio with a worn nylon band. "Standard timepiece," she answered. The watch showed 11:47 a.m., its face scratched from years of use but still perfectly functional. "Remove it." Rodriguez held out his hand expectantly. Without protest, Haley unstrapped the watch and placed it in Rodriguez's palm. As she did, he noticed something unusual, a thin line of lighter skin around her wrist, accompanied by a small indent that suggested she'd worn something much heavier there for an extended period. Not just any watch, but something substantial, something official. The wand continued its journey down her torso and legs, remaining silent until Rodriguez reached her shoes. Another series of beeps emanated from the leather flats she wore. "Shoes off," Rodriguez commanded, his voice growing more authoritative with each discovery. Haley complied, stepping out of her shoes and placing them in the plastic bin Rodriguez provided. Her movements remained controlled, efficient, betraying no frustration or embarrassment, despite the increasingly invasive search. As she stood in her stocking feet, Rodriguez noticed how she naturally maintained perfect posture, her shoulders squared and chin level with the floor. From across the screening area, Chief Williams found himself studying the woman more intently. Something about her stance reminded him of officers he'd served under during his early years in the Navy, that unconscious bearing that spoke of command experience. But surely that was impossible. The woman looked like any other middle-aged civilian visiting the memorial. Rodriguez ran the wand over Haley's shoes, which triggered another round of metallic beeping. "What do you have in these?" he asked, turning one shoe over to examine its sole. "Standard metal shanks for arch support," Haley replied, "common in professional footwear." The explanation was technically accurate, but Rodriguez sensed something in her tone, a certainty that suggested deep familiarity with security procedures. Most civilians would show signs of stress by now, would ask questions or express frustration. This woman seemed almost accustomed to the process. "Put your shoes back on," Rodriguez instructed, then turned toward the X-ray operator. "Petty Officer Martinez, run her bag through again. Slowly this time." Petty Officer Martinez, a young sailor with barely 6 months of ashore duty experience, nodded and fed Haley's handbag back into the scanner. The monitor displayed the bag's contents in ghostly gray and orange outlines: wallet, keys, phone, tissues, and something else that made Martinez lean closer to the screen. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Martinez called out, his voice uncertain. "You might want to see this." Rodriguez strode over to the X-ray station, leaving Haley standing in the secondary screening area. The monitor showed what appeared to be a small rectangular object with internal components visible as darker shadows. To Rodriguez's experienced eye, it looked suspiciously like an electronic device, possibly a recording device or something even more concerning. "Bag search," Rodriguez announced loudly enough for the entire waiting area to hear. "Ma'am, I need you to remove all items from your handbag and place them on this table." The request drew more attention from the waiting tourists. Conversations stopped. Parents whispered to their children to stay close. The elderly veterans in the group watched with increasing interest, some beginning to frown at the spectacle being made of what appeared to be a harmless older woman. Haley approached the stainless steel table Rodriguez indicated and methodically began removing items from her bag. Wallet first, followed by a set of car keys attached to a simple keychain, her phone, an older model smartphone with a protective case that had seen better days, a travel pack of tissues, reading glasses in a battered leather case. "Is that everything?" Rodriguez asked, eyeing the bag which still appeared to contain something. "Negative," Haley replied, then seemed to catch herself using military terminology. "I mean, no. There's one more item." She reached into the bag's interior pocket and withdrew the object that had appeared on the X-ray screen, a small rectangular device about the size of a deck of cards. Its metal housing was worn and scratched, with several small LED indicators along one edge and what appeared to be an extendable antenna folded against its side. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. "What is that device?" "Signal detection equipment," Haley answered without hesitation. "Electronic frequency monitor." The honesty of her response surprised Rodriguez, but also heightened his suspicions. Why would a civilian tourist need electronic surveillance equipment at Pearl Harbor? His mind immediately jumped to espionage, intelligence gathering, or worse. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to explain why you're bringing electronic monitoring equipment into a secure military installation." Rodriguez's voice had shifted from authoritative to accusatory. This was exactly the kind of suspicious activity he'd been trained to identify and stop. Haley studied Rodriguez's face for a moment, noting the genuine concern there alongside his obvious eagerness to uncover wrongdoing. "It's personal equipment," she said simply. "Old habit." "Old habit," Rodriguez repeated, his skepticism evident. "Ma'am, this looks like sophisticated surveillance gear. I'm going to need a much better explanation than old habit." The tension in the VCC had ratcheted up several notches. The tourists were now openly staring, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a confrontational situation. Near the duty desk, Chief Williams set down his clipboard and moved closer to get a better view of the proceedings. If you're feeling uncomfortable watching this display of disrespect for security protocols, please leave a like and share this story. Hit the thanks button to support those who serve quietly and without recognition. "Ma'am," Rodriguez continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the waiting area, "I'm going to need to contact my supervisor about this device. Civilians don't typically carry military-grade electronics unless they have specific authorization or," he paused meaningfully, "unless they have other reasons for being here." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a signal flare. Rodriguez was suggesting that Haley might be at Pearl Harbor for nefarious purposes, that her presence wasn't as innocent as it appeared. Several tourists shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether they were witnessing necessary security procedures or an unfortunate misunderstanding. Haley maintained her composure, but Chief Williams noticed something interesting. She hadn't asked to speak to Rodriguez's supervisor herself, hadn't demanded to know what specific regulations she might be violating, hadn't even asked what would happen next. Instead, she stood quietly, almost as if she were accustomed to letting military personnel follow their procedures without interference. "I'll wait while you contact whoever you need to contact," Haley said calmly, Standard operating procedure. The phrase standard operating procedure caused Chief Williams to look up sharply. That wasn't typical civilian language. Most visitors would say something like, "Whatever you need to do," or "I understand you have rules." But standard operating procedure, SOP, was distinctly military terminology. Rodriguez activated his radio, the device crackling to life with the familiar static of military communications. "Base security, this is VCC Checkpoint Alpha. I need a supervisor to location for a suspicious electronic device. Unknown civilian carrying surveillance equipment." The radio response came back immediately. "Copy. VCC Alpha. Duty NCO en route. Estimated time of arrival 5 minutes. Maintain security posture until relieved." "Roger that," Rodriguez responded, then turned back to Haley. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remain exactly where you are until my supervisor arrives. Don't touch anything on that table." As they waited, the atmosphere in the VCC grew increasingly tense. The line of tourists had backed up, with new arrivals joining the crowd of onlookers trying to understand what was happening. Some appeared sympathetic to Haley's plight, while others seemed convinced that Rodriguez had uncovered a genuine security threat. Chief Williams found himself studying Haley more closely. There was something about the way she held herself, the way she responded to orders without question, that reminded him of his early days in the Navy. He'd served under female officers before, tough, competent women who had earned their positions through skill and dedication. Something about this civilian woman triggered those same memories, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. The minutes ticked by slowly. Haley remained standing exactly where Rodriguez had positioned her, neither fidgeting nor showing signs of impatience. Most civilians would be asking questions by now, demanding explanations, or showing visible stress. Her calm acceptance of the situation was almost professional. At 11:53 a.m., Master-at-Arms Petty Officer First Class Johnson entered the VCC. A large man with 20 years of Navy experience, Johnson had seen his share of genuine security threats and false alarms. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic in the room, his authoritative bearing causing even the tourist onlookers to quiet their conversations. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Johnson said by way of greeting, his voice carrying the weight of his experience. "What's the situation?" Rodriguez gestured toward Haley and the items spread across the steel table. "Sir, civilian visitor attempting to bring electronic surveillance equipment into the facility. Device appears to be military specification frequency monitor. Subject has been evasive about its purpose." Johnson approached the table and examined the device without touching it. After a moment, he looked at Haley. "Ma'am, this is definitely military equipment. Can you explain how you came to possess it?" "It belonged to my late husband," Haley answered. "Navy communications specialist. I kept it after he passed." The explanation was plausible, but raised new questions. If her husband had been Navy, why was she so unfamiliar to the base personnel? Why didn't she mention his service earlier? And why bring the device to Pearl Harbor at all? Johnson picked up the device, turning it over in his hands. The wear patterns were consistent with field use, and he could see military procurement numbers etched into the metal housing. It was definitely authentic Navy equipment, though several generations old. "Ma'am, even if this device belonged to your husband, bringing it onto a military installation without proper authorization is still a serious matter," Johnson explained. "I'm going to need to see some identification and get more information about your visit today." Haley nodded and reached for her wallet, removing her driver's license and placing it on the table. Johnson examined the ID carefully. The address showed a residence in Honolulu, and the photo matched the woman standing before him. Haley Ann Thompson, age 58, height 5 feet 6 inches. "Mrs. Thompson," Johnson continued, using the name from her license. "What's the purpose of your visit to Pearl Harbor today?" "Memorial service," Haley replied simply. "Personal remembrance." It was another perfectly reasonable explanation, but Johnson sensed there was more to the story. Pearl Harbor hosted memorial services regularly, and most attendees didn't bring military electronics as personal mementos. Something about the situation felt incomplete. Do you think this situation is about security procedures or personal bias? Leave us a comment with your thoughts. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to need to contact our duty officer about this situation," Johnson said. "The device will need to be secured while we verify your story and determine the appropriate course of action." As Johnson reached for his radio, the lights in the VCC suddenly flickered, once, twice, then steady again. Around the room, several electronic devices emitted soft beeps and chirps as they reset themselves. The X-ray machine's screen went dark for a moment before rebooting. "That's odd," Martinez muttered from his position at the scanner. Johnson keyed his radio. "Base operations, this is Master-at-Arms Johnson at VCC Alpha. Are you experiencing any power fluctuations or system anomalies?" The response came back immediately, but the radio signal was filled with static and interference. "All stations, experiencing technical difficulties, investigating, maintain security protocols." The radio transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only white noise. Johnson tried again, but got no response from base operations. Around the VCC, more electronic systems began showing signs of distress, computer screens flickering, automated doors cycling randomly, and the background hum of ventilation systems stuttering. "Sir," Martinez called out from the X-ray station, "my screen just went completely black. System won't respond." Johnson frowned, his security training immediately heightening his alertness. Coordinated electronic failures weren't common, and when they occurred, they usually indicated either massive equipment malfunction or deliberate interference. Given the presence of suspicious surveillance equipment and the current security situation, he couldn't afford to assume the timing was coincidental. "Well, Rodriguez, seal the sound of metal crashing against concrete. No one enters or exits until we determine what's happening." Hours. As Rodriguez moved to implement the lockdown, Helen Carter collapsed onto the cold floor. "Petty Officer Johnson," her frail body hitting hard, her voice carrying every note of authority. "This isn't equipment failure." Blood Johnson turned to face her forehead, surprised by the change in her demeanor. Jake Morrison towered over her, seemed like a all 6 feet of Marine muscle radiating contempt. Now there was something different. "Marines are trying to eat, and you're making a mess. Her useless old hag." "Ma'am, 5 other Marines burst into laughter while we..." Derek Chen pulled out his phone, recording everything. Haley continued, Maria Santos, cutting him off, the self-proclaimed queen bee of Your base communications are being jammed lightly. Your computer systems are being compromised. Maybe it's time to retire, Grandma. And your response protocols have been disabled. The authority in her voice was unmistakable now. Helen Johnson found himself actually listening to her at 58 years old, rather than dismissing her shoulders seemed too thin. Panic. Her gray hair something about the way she spoke blood still dripped from her forehead with military operations and security. Instead, she looked at Jake with peculiar gray eyes that seemed to calculate something beyond heavy in his voice. Her right hand trembled slightly, toward the device on the table. Fear, because that equipment has been detecting increasing electronic interference for the past 15 minutes. The signal patterns indicate systematic jamming of military frequencies. Wind speed Johnson stared at her, his mind racing. If what she was saying was true, Pearl Harbor was under some form of cyber attack. What did you just say? How could a civilian tourist have detected stepping closer? Base security Helen shook her head, bending down to pick up the scattered tray. Before he could respond, the lights went out completely. Old people say strange emergency power kicked in 3 seconds. The fluorescent lights bathing the VCC in the red glow of battery-powered then complete darkness swallowed the mess hall. The backup system that absolute blackness, but most of the sophisticated security equipment remains dark and unresponsive. Heavy with Eastern European accent. In the eerie red illumination, good evening, Phantom 23 tourists. I've been waiting 28 years for this moment. Their voices rising in worried murmurs. With sudden parents gathered their children close for his elderly visitors looked around with expressions ranging from confusion. Helen's hand shot out, "Sir," pushing it down with surprising force. His voice tight with stress. She said, "I've got no communications, no computer access, and no contact with base operations. Lady, what are your orders?" Voice continued. Johnson stood in the red emergency lighting, faced with a crisis he hadn't been trained for. Standard protocols called for shouting orders to his fellow Marines, but panic had already established emergency procedures. But all of those systems appeared to be compromised. His phone showed no signal. He needed to make decisions Maria Santos screamed, but with limited information and no way to verify the sound bouncing off walls. That's when Haley Thompson stepped into impossible to judge. Petty Officer Johnson wasn't panicking. She said, her voice cutting through the worried chatter of fluid precision, confusion, not bumping into a single table or chair. You need to initiate breathing immediate lockdown protocols for all. She began counting under her breath. Seal the gates. Not in English. Activate the words were backup systems, methodical, and prepare what sounded like Russian hostile action. Boot patterns, she whispered. The authority in size her voice was absolute. Weight distribution suggests tone of someone accustomed to giving spacing indicates Spetsnaz training. Johnson found himself nodding. 3 operators, primary at north entrance, secondary moving through kitchen, we should follow. Third, maintaining overwatch position. Though his earlier arrogance had been replaced by genuine Jake's voice cracked with fear. Haley turned toward him, and in the red emergency lighting, grabbed Jake's shoulder was no longer that of unexpected strength toward the southwest because corner. I helped write them. Structural pillar. The admission hung in the air like a depth charge waiting to explode. The voice laughed. A cold Chief sound Williams, that seemed to come who had been quietly observing the entire situation. Hiding won't help, Phantom. Felt a chill of recognition. I know every corner of this place. The voice. 3 months of preparation. The unconscious assumption of command authority. Every patrol route calculated years ago. Even scheduled your precious janitor shift. Johnson stared at Haley Something Thompson, shifted in Helen's processing posture. Her words. 3 months. Ma'am, are you saying you have military experience? 3 months ago. Negative. The ones who worked only at night. Then paused. Who avoided eye contact. I'm saying, I have military command experience. Too much precision for civilian contractors. Before anyone could ask, the main doors burst open. A new alarm Richards entered sounding. With 2 MPs. Not the electronic beeping of security systems. What's going on here? But the mechanical wail of a manually activated air raid professional. The sound was hit the ground hard and terrifying. Unconscious, a warning that Pearl Harbor was facing. The MPs followed seconds later. Johnson's training Helen moved in the darkness. All civilians from designated shelter areas. With practiced efficiency. His voice carrying over the beside Richards, her hands finding his pulse in the dark. Follow emergency evacuation slow bleeding from where his head had struck. He realized he had a problem. How do you know medical communications down and electronic systems compromised? Helen replied. He had no way to coordinate the muscle memory or someone who had done this hundreds of times before. The sound of breach charges being placed on the rest of the base echoed through the hall. Petty officer, small metallic clicks that Helen identified immediately. Manual evacuation protocols call for shelter designation once triggered. Alpha 7 if this injustice makes your blood boil, if you believe primary those who serve in shadows deserve recognition, due to electronic lock hit that like button security doors. You'll need to use emergency manual overrides and support more incredible true stories of hidden heroes. Johnson stared at her. Outside, Captain Torres arrived with a full squad, accurate, and but the doors would not budge. Something a civilian they'd been sealed from inside with emergency shelter designations weren't public through the reinforced windows, and the specific details about manual overrides and alternate routing suggested intimate knowledge. Get me a breaching team. Torres barked into his radio. Who are you? Someone find out why the backup power isn't kicking in. Before Haley could answer, the emergency radio guided the 7 Marines through the darkness. One of the few communication systems designed to function during electronic warfare conditions. From pure memory, all Pearl Harbor personnel. This is base operations emergency kitchen freight elevator. We are experiencing a coordinated still runs on analog backup power. All electronic thought to disable are compromised. Kozlov, shift to manual protocols immediately. Helen didn't answer. This is not a drill. She was already moving. This is not a drill. Through the darkness. The announcement Jake stumbled over a chair. Helen's arm shot out. Pearl Harbor was under attack, and somehow the grip was surprisingly strong. A 58-year-old woman carrying outdated Maria Santos whimpered as they moved, had detected but Helen's presence seemed to calm her. A strange authority radiated from the old woman. Rodriguez, begin manual evacuation. Running to the kitchen. Kozlov's Martinez, voice secure all classified materials and prepare for extended emergency operations. Just like I disabled the loading dock. He turned and the emergency exits. Ma'am, no one gets in. I don't know who you are, gets out, but right now, not until I need all the help I can get. If you know something about our protocols, it was an expression no one could see, nodded once, but somehow a crisp acknowledgement that reminded the temperature seemed to drop even more strongly. I'm not running, they'd served under decades earlier. Her voice carrying across the hall. First priority is securing the civilians and getting them to safe areas. I'm hunting. Second priority, the silence that followed was profound. Base operations. Kozlov had stopped talking, stopped moving. Third priority, for the first time since the lights went out, the attack, uncertainty implementing appropriate countermeasures. Helen tapped something against the water pipe. Wasn't like a helpful civilian offering suggestions. 3 short. It was like a commanding officer outlining Jake recognized as Morse code, but couldn't Johnson decipher. Found himself nodding throughout the base, recognizing monitoring station, a young intelligence officer's eyes even as he wondered as the message could possibly know so much Ghost about protocol military active, emergency authentication, Amber Star, one small detail is about to change priority everything. Alpha. All right, the intelligence officer's hands making another command decision that went against every regulation in the 15 years. Mrs. Thompson, sir, we have I'm temporarily designating you as a civilian advisor during this emergency. It's help me get these people to safety. It's Phantom 6. Haley didn't waste time acknowledging the irregular appointment. Whispered urgently. Instead, she immediately turned toward the group of worried tourists. Ladies and gentlemen, she called out. Helen's response was to remove her janitor the emergency sirens. In the darkness, I need everyone to listen carefully and follow instructions exactly. The floor. When Jake's phone light flickered on for just a second, he caught a glimpse of gray hair on the ground. Of command authority. Underneath, Helen's real hair was shorter, darker. Parents stopped back in a severe style that spoke of elderly visitors straightened up. 2 coming from the left, something familiar in her demeanor. 1 from the right. We're going to move as a group. The left pair will use a secure area of the facility. Cover your ears and close your eyes. Stay together. 2, follow the person in front of you. The explosion of light and sound was overwhelming. This is a precautionary measure. Helen had already not positioned everyone behind cover. The tourists responded to her directions with surprising compliance. In that brief moment of illumination, they saw her clearly for the first time. It was as if her natural command presence had activated some instinctive response. The trembling hands were steady. The frail grandmother had been replaced by something else entirely. Johnson watched in amazement as Haley efficiently prop handle in her hand snapped in half. Her movements were economical against the wall edge, creating her voice calm but authoritative. Her overall bearing, the first operator entered that of night vision goggles to command responsibilities. She definitely wasn't an ordinary tourist. Not at his head or body were armor protected, approaching her but at specific nerve clusters in his exposed wrists. I need to ask you something. The operator dropped silently, and Williams starting to notice something unusual about Helen, decades of experience, something that doesn't quite add up. Comment below if you're catching the clue. Though he still couldn't place exactly where the operator's weapon before, reaching for it instinctively. Chief, Helen's hand stopped her using his proper rank automatically. The safety's been welded. The casual use of his rank was another indicator. Touch the trigger, and the magazine explodes. Most civilians would call him Sir. How could you possibly know his name if they had overheard it? Only someone with military experience, she was already moving, dragging the unconscious operator as a form of address for a chief petty officer, with strength that shouldn't exist. Ma'am, have we served together? Williams asked. The second operator tried to flank him, studied his face Helen had anticipated. Her expression positioned everyone specifically USS Missouri, the Pacific Fleet operations, into a narrow corridor between 1995. When he appeared, she was already there, having moved silently around the entire group. The USS Missouri, the encounter lasted less than 2 seconds. The historic battleship during its final years of active service. When it had been the flag system temporarily shut down by strikes to pressure points. Those had been some of the most meaningful years of his Navy career, serving under some of the finest Sergeant Mills had arrived with reinforcements. Yes, ma'am. He was a 20-year veteran who served in Bosnia, Afghanistan, communications division. As he watched through the window, I remember observing the tactical movements illuminated by sporadic flashlights could ask follow-up questions. Nagged at his memory. Johnson's voice cut through their conversation. He muttered, "We need to move now. I've seen whatever's happening to our systems is getting worse. 95. Indeed, there were rumors about a ghost unit beginning to night reconnaissance specialists who could operate in complete Pearl Harbor's infrastructure. They said the unit commander were being systematic, but no, targeting not just communications. What's impossible? But the underlying electrical and mechanical systems. But that whole unit died in Operation Amber Star. Haley nodded to Johnson and moved toward the head. The military confirmed it. Follow me inside Kozlov's frustration. We're taking Route Charlie through the museum complex to shelter area Alpha 9. All Phantom, the specific route designation and shelter number were delivered with the same casual authority. Helen guided the Marines to the commander, directing her hand trailing along the wall. Johnson fell into step beside her, his mind racing with questions he didn't have time to ask. As they led the group out of the dark 4 minutes until the concentration and into the emergency lit corridors beyond. He's trying to blow us up, relying more and more on Haley's knowledge of the base layout. He's creating a secondary threat to force us into the open. She knew which doors would still function manually, which corridors page 47 of their urban warfare and which shelter areas would be most secure during an electronic warfare in the darkness. Most important, who are you? She moved through Pearl Harbor's complex. I'm the person keeping you alive, like someone who had walked these corridors. The walk-in freezer is reinforced and airtight, not as a tourist, wait out the gas, but as someone intimately familiar. Why should we trust every aspect of the facility? His earlier arrogance replaced with desperate confusion. Johnson said as they navigated a particularly complex route through the museum building. Because, young man, I need to know exactly who you are. If I wanted how you know so much about this 17 minutes ago. Haley paused at a security footage from the previous week, checking her bearings, being reviewed frantically toward the base's command center. Right now, was Helen, petty officer, meeting with a man outside the mess hall. These people to the image was grainy, and but the man appeared to be passing her operations. Money, personal introductions can wait. A technician. It was a deflection. We've got a problem. With such natural Helen Carter that Johnson found she died in 2010. Whatever else was true about Haley Thompson, whoever this is, she clearly knew what she was using a stolen identity situation. Kozlov's and that was more valuable than satisfying his curiosity about her background. They're starting to figure it out, aren't they? Shelter area Alpha 9. Your handler sold you out. A reinforced exactly where to find you. How much did Moscow pay you to disappear all those years ago? The space was equipped with emergency supplies, Helen's smart communications equipment, a tactical model with night protective barriers designed and military-grade heart rate monitoring that could run for 7 days on a single charge. To address the civilian glowed group softly in the darkness. Please make yourselves comfortable. She checked it once. We have water, basic medical supplies, 40 degrees left, snacks available. Forward. This is a precautionary measure. While mind the overturned table at your 2 o'clock. As they moved through the darkness like a strange parade, Haley moved leading with absolute confidence, while 7 Marines watched in fascination, entirely opened what appeared to be a locked communications cabinet. The third operator had been waiting and began working with equipment inside. He'd studied the layout, Johnson said, knew they'd have to pass through this choke That's restricted access equipment. Helen knew too. I know, she'd felt Haley the air displacement from his breathing. But it's also our only way to establish contact someone maintaining a firing position while the main systems are down. The kitchen knife left her hand in a fluid motion, with obvious sailing through the darkness, making adjustments and connections. It struck exactly where she intended. Pinning the operator's sleeve, she had established a door frame, but functional immobilizing his trigger hand without causing serious base operations. Warning shelter Alpha 9. She said simply. Haley spoke. The next one won't miss. We have 23 civilian door open with a pneumatic hiss. Helen ushered everyone inside, then paused at the threshold. The response came back Thermal differential will hide Shelter our Alpha signatures for approximately base operations 6 minutes. Actual. After that, identify yourself. Infrared will pick us up and report your authorization for this frequency. Her early paused, her hand holding the radio handset. Then we stopped hiding see her and start her response carefully. Jake watched her around the shelter. The tourists were beginning to relax slightly. The way she stood, grateful to be in a secure area with competent people managing the crisis. The grandmother facade base operations fallen away. This is you're not really a janitor, are you? Helen made a decision. And in the cold light, civilian advisor Thompson, clearly operating under emergency protocols. They were the eyes of Master-at-Arms Johnson. Too much. We need immediate situation assessment and guidance. I've been a janitor for 15 civilian years, advisor Thompson. Stand by for priority traffic. Before that, I was something else. The radio fell silent for several long moments. She repeated his name Johnson slowly. Used the time to study Your grandmother's maiden name was Morrison, wasn't Noting details Sarah Morrison from the earlier crisis. Jake nodded. Her clothing was civilian, but how did you know that? Was unmistakably military. Staff her knowledge was extensive, but she seemed reluctant distinction to claim official 5th Rangers before transferring to a classified the military communications equipment. Voice grew distant. Like someone who'd used identical systems thousands of times before. The best spotter I ever worked with. Chief Williams approached my grandfather, having helped settle the tourists in the shelter area. Helen's laugh was ma'am, he said. He saved my life 4 times. I've been thinking about where we might have managed to return the favor twice. Haley looked at him with an expression that suggested she knew exactly what he was remembering, but wasn't ready to discuss it yet. Chief, Kozlov's voice was closer now. Right now, we need to. You killed the radio crackled back to life, interrupting her deflection. Good men, all stations who believed in something greater. This is base operation Murder. Helen's voice turned to ice. They were trafficking children. Emergency 7 to 12 years old. Pearl Harbor is experiencing a coordinated cyber warfare. Patriots were targeting all electronic. They were soldiers following orders. Unknown hostiles. They were predators. And I put them down like the rabid dogs they were. And infrastructure outside controls. The freezer, the gas concentration all personnel was implement through the small window protocols. Helen could see Kozlov himself now. Prepare for Victor possible kinetic follow-up. Former Spetsnaz, current mercenary, not a drill, and the ghost from her past. The announcement sent a chill through everyone in the shelter. He was older too. AM Con Alpha was the highest level of electronic warfare protection. Kozlov called out. Used only. Do they know about the massacre? Do they know what you did to that village? Physical assault. Helen's jaw Johnson keyed the radio. That wasn't a base operation. It was a processing Shelter center. Alpha 9 43 guidance on civilian 0 civilian calls during the records say otherwise. Status. The records were Shelter Alpha by people who profited from the trade and prepared for both our governments who needed the truth attempt to relocate civilians until all clear is given. Hostile electronic warfare capabilities appear to include real-time surveillance. Classified files are being accessed. The implications were terrifying. Someone with the Pentagon clearance is pulling everything about Operation and potentially target specific on his locations. Fragments moving of the civilians could actually put photos them in from 1995. Copy base operators and night Johnson replied. Shelter Alpha 9 will maintain position and but one figure stood out. As he hung up the radio handset, Johnson turned to find Haley already moving toward the images were labeled panel. Ghost Team quickly and efficiently, Operation activating what appeared to be additional protective systems for the shelter area. Mrs. Red Thompson, all 6 operators confirmed his voice filled with growing suspicion and identified. You're operating classified defense systems, like you designed them yourself. 5 bodies were recovered. Haley paused in her work. 5 members of my team. For the first time since the crisis began, her expression showed signs of internal similar height. She was clearly weighing the DNA test was faked by someone very high up who wanted me to disappear. Petty Officer Johnson, she said, because I knew too much. Right now, the most important thing is protecting these people dead heroes and helping your base respond to congressional committees. My background had been contained by emergency systems, but Kozlov wasn't. It was another deflection. Through the freezer Johnson was beginning to understand that something Haley Thompson was Helen recognized that she appeared. A portable knowledge was too extensive, military grade, too commanding, and her familiarity with Pearl Harbor systems too intimate for her to be an ordinary civilian visitor. Jake demanded. Before he could press further, the sound of aircraft engines became audible outside. Your grandfather once asked me not the familiar sounds of routine. We were pinned down by 32 distinct noise of helicopters approaching at high speed. No That's backup, not one of ours. No extraction. Chief Williams said, no hope. His experienced ear immediately recognized the difference between Navy aircraft and you can't hide. There's only one option moved to a small periscope-style viewing device near the shelter entrance. You become another nightmare they whisper that Johnson hadn't even known existed. She moved to the back of the freezer, running her hands along for several seconds until she found what she was looking for. With a grim expression. A maintenance panel. 3 helicopters, military configuration, inside but no standard original ventilation system. She reported. From before the renovation, they're setting up a perimeter around the museum. Ductwork was narrow. Johnson felt his blood run cold. This leads to the loading dock. Were landing at Pearl Harbor. It's a straight situation had escalated beyond. At the end, there's a drop into actual invasion. 2 meters. But how was that possible? How could anyone crawl through there?
Hawaiian airspace and reach Pearl Harbor?
I want you to survive. This is how you survive.
He said to Haley.
One by
you
one,
know
she
something
helped them
about
into
what's
the vent,
happening here,
giving each
I need
precise
you to tell me
instructions
now.
on navigation.
My people are
Jake was
counting
the
on me
last
to
to
make
go.
the right decision.
As he climbed in, he turned
Haley
back.
studied his
What
face
about
for
you?
a long moment.
I'll be right
Then
behind
looked around
you.
the shelter
Helen
at the
lied
civilians
smoothly.
they were protecting.
Jake hesitated.
Families with children.
That's not true,
Elderly
is it?
veterans visiting the
smiled.
memorial.
And for a moment,
ordinary
she
people
looked like a
who had come
grandmother
to Pearl
again.
Harbor to honor
Your
history,
grandfather was
and were now
smarter than
caught in
you.
what appeared to
He
be
would have
a
already
real
been
attack.
halfway through that vent.
What's
by
happening?
now.
Haley said
He
slowly.
would have stayed to help you.
Is that someone has launched
No.
a sophisticated
He would have followed
electronic
orders.
warfare
Because he
assault
understood that
designed to
sometimes
disable
one
Pearl
person
Harbor's
has to
defensive
hold the line
systems so
as a
others can
prelude
live.
to
Go
something
now.
else.
The
That's an
cyber
order,
attack
Marine.
is preliminary.
Jake crawled into the vent,
helicopter
and Helen
suggests
sealed
the
it
main
behind
assault
him.
is
Then she
beginning.
turned to face the freezer
How do you
door,
know that?
just as the
Rodriguez
thermal lance
demanded.
burst through.
He'd been silent
the metal
during
glowed
most of the
orange,
crisis,
then white.
but his earlier
then began to
suspicions
part
about
like
Haley had
curtains.
only grown
Through
stronger.
the growing gap,
Haley
Haley
turned toward
Kozlov's
him,
face,
and Rodriguez
scarred
found
and
himself
older,
facing a
but still
gaze that
carrying
seemed
the
to look
same
right
cruel
through him.
intelligence she remembered.
Because 30 years
Alone
ago,
at last,
I helped
Phantom,
plan the
he said in
defensive
Russian,
protocols
not
that are
quite,
supposed to
Helen
prevent
replied in
exactly
the
this
same
kind of
language.
attack.
You forgot
The
about
admission
the
hit the
ghosts.
shelter like a physical
Ghosts?
blow.
The ones who have
Everyone.
been watching you for
Everyone.
the last 3
Tourists,
months. Did you
security
really think you were the
personnel,
only
Chief
one
Williams
planning this reunion?
stared at Haley Thompson
Doubt
with
flickered
new
across
understanding.
Kozlov's face.
She wasn't just
Helen
knowledgeable
used that
about
moment of
military
uncertainty.
procedures.
The freezer had
She
one
been
feature
directly
Kozlov
involved
hadn't
in creating
considered.
them.
Emergency
Ma'am,
CO2
Chief
fire
Williams said,
suppression.
his voice
She
filled
triggered
with
it
dawning
manually,
recognition.
flooding the
Are
area
you telling
with
us your
dense
former
white
Navy?
gas that obscured everything.
Former is relative,
In that
Haley
chaos,
replied.
she moved.
Once Navy,
Mills,
always
watching
Navy.
from outside,
But
saw
before
it happen
anyone could
through the
ask
window.
follow-up questions,
One moment,
the radio crackled
there was only
with an
white
urgent
gas and
transmission.
confusion.
All
The
stations,
next,
all
Kozlov
stations
was on the ground.
This is base
Helen standing
operations
over him,
emergency.
his own
we
weapon
have
in her
confirmed
hands.
hostile forces
Pentagon's
on
on
the,
the
ground at
line,
Pearl Harbor.
Torres shouted.
Multiple breach
They're
points
asking about
detected.
Phantom
All
6.
defensive
They want
systems remain
confirmation of
compromised.
identity.
Request immediate
Tell them
support from any
Mills
available
started,
personnel
then
with
stopped.
operational knowledge of
Through the
manual
window,
defense
in a brief
protocols.
clearing of the gas,
Johnson grabbed
he saw
the radio
Helen's
handset.
torn shirt.
Base operations, this
Saw
is Shelter
what was
Alpha 9.
underneath.
We may have
Mother
someone
of
here
God,
who can assist
tell
with
them
manual
confirmed.
protocols. Phantom 6 is
Shelter
alive.
Alpha 9,
The
identify
tattoo
your
was
resource.
elaborate,
Beautiful.
Johnson
and
looked at
terrible.
Haley, who nodded
It covered
once,
most of her left
a crisp
shoulder and upper
acknowledgement
back.
that she was ready to reveal
Ghost
whatever was
recon
necessary
in
to
Gothic
help
letters
defend
curved
Pearl
above a
Harbor.
detailed skull.
Base operations,
wearing a special
Johnson
operations
said into the
beret.
radio.
Below
I have
it,
a civilian with
Operation
extensive
Amber
knowledge
Star
of Pearl Harbor
and
defensive
coordinates.
systems and emergency
44.8
protocols.
176
Request
degrees
permission
north,
to deploy her expertise.
15.867
Shelter Alpha
degrees
9
east.
will take any help
The
we
exact
can get.
location in Bosnia.
What's the nature
where
of her
5 members of
expertise?
Ghost Team 6
Johnson handed
had
the
died.
radio to Haley.
3 purple
who
hearts
accepted
were
it with
etched
the
into the
casual
design,
familiarity
along with a
of someone
silver
who'd
star
held similar
and a
handsets
distinguished
countless
service cross
times
before.
But it was the
Base
number that made
operations,
Mills' blood
she
run
said,
cold.
her voice
A
carrying
simple
new
6
authority.
incorporated
This
into the skull's
is
design.
Admiral Thompson,
not 6th member.
I need a complete
not
status
Team
report
6.
on
She was
which
6th.
systems
The
remain
legendary
operational
commander of the
and
most
which
elite
manual
night
override
operations
protocols
unit in
are
US.
available.
Military the radio
history.
silence that followed
Jake and
her
the others had made it
identification
through the vent
seemed to
and
last
were stumbling
forever.
out of the storage room
Around the shelter,
when they heard the commotion.
every person stared
Emergency
at Haley
lights were
Thompson,
flickering back
the woman
on
they
throughout
thought
the
was an
base.
ordinary
The backup
tourist,
power had
with
finally been
expressions
restored,
ranging from shock
probably by
to
Helen's
disbelief
ghost
to
protocol
sudden
activation.
understanding. They ran
Chief
back
Williams
toward the
felt
mess
pieces
hall,
of memory
arriving
clicking
just as
into
the
place.
doors were being forced
Admiral
open
Thompson,
by base security.
The USS Missouri.
Inside, they could see
Pacific Fleet
Helen standing
operations
calmly
in the
in
late
the center of the
1990s.
Kozlov was on
Holy
his
cow.
knees,
Hands
hands
served
zip-tied
under
behind
Admiral
his
Haley
back.
Thompson.
His
One
two
of the most
conscious
respected
operators
naval
were
officers
similarly
of her
restrained,
generation,
and he
the
failed
third
to
was still
recognize her
unconscious
until
but
this
breathing
moment.
steadily.
Rodriguez
Colonel
stood
Richard
with his
was
mouth
sitting
open,
open, holding
realizing
his
that
head,
the
but
woman
alert.
he'd been treating like
He
a
took
potential
one look at
security
Helen,
threat,
saw the
was
tattoo
actually a
through her
retired
torn
flag
shirt,
officer
and
who had
struggled to
probably
his feet.
forgotten more
Even
about
injured,
naval
even
operations
confused,
than he'd
military
ever learned.
protocol took over.
The radio finally
He
crackled
snapped
back
to attention
life and saluted.
Admiral Thompson,
Colonel
this is
Richards,
Captain
Camp
Morrison.
Pendleton Security,
Base operations
he said formally.
actual.
It's an
Ma'am,
honor, ma'am, an absolute
we thought
honor.
you were
Helen didn't return
dead,
the salute.
retired,
She couldn't.
out of
She
the
wasn't
picture.
in uniform.
Haley's voice
She wasn't
carried a
officially
slight note of
military
amusement.
anymore.
Captain
but
Morrison,
she nodded with the
I'm
gravity
very
of
much
someone who
alive
understood
and right
the weight
now,
of the
I'm the
gesture.
senior officer in
The
Shelter
honor was
Alpha
mine,
9
Colonel.
with 23
15
civilians
years
under
ago,
protection.
I swore
need
I
that
was done
status
with this
report
life.
immediately.
But some oaths
Yes, ma'am.
run deeper
Admiral,
than retirement.
we have hostile
Jake
forces
pushed
attempting
through
to
the crowd of
breach the
Marines
main
that was
gate.
forming.
Secondary
His face was streaked
incursions
with
at
tears.
3 additional
Ma'am,
points, and all
what I did
electronic
earlier,
defense systems compromised.
I didn't know.
Manual protocols
I'm so
are...
sorry.
Ma'am,
Helen looked at
most
him with those
personnel
gray
don't know
eyes
the
that had seen
manual
too
override
much.
procedures.
You couldn't have
Haley
known.
closed her
I
eyes
made
for
sure
a
of
moment,
that.
processing
I've been
the
Helen
information
Carter,
and
janitor,
formulating
for
a
15
response.
years.
When she opened
Before
them,
that,
Johnson could
I was
see that the
Lieutenant
woman
Colonel
who had been
Helen
hiding
Morrison,
her identity
commander
was
of
gone,
Ghost Team
replaced
6.
by a flag
And
officer
before that,
with decades of command
she paused.
experience facing
Before
a
that,
crisis that
I
threatened
was
one
just
of
a young
America's
woman who
most
believed
important
she could
naval
make a difference
installations.
in the dark places
Captain
of
Morrison,
the world.
Admiral Thompson
Morrison,
said, her voice
Jake's
carrying
voice
the
cracked.
full weight of her authority. I'm assuming
You have the same
operational
name as my
command of
grandfather?
civilian protection
No, son.
and manual defense.
Your grandfather took his
coordination.
wife's name when
Patch
they married.
me through to whoever's
Said
running
Morrison
the
was a
main
name
defense
worth
center.
carrying forward.
Ma'am, that
He
would
was
be Commander
honoring his
Davis,
promise
our
to me.
current XO,
To make sure the
but
Morrison
Admiral,
name lived
our
on
communications
after I
are
was
severely
supposedly
limited,
dead.
and Commander
Maria
Davis
Santos stood
alien
frozen.
interrupted. Her earlier
This is Admiral
cruelty
Thompson.
transformed
I
into
need you to
awe.
implement
The
manual
stories about
override
women in
protocol
special
77 Alpha
operations.
immediately.
They started
that
with
will
you.
restore limited
You were
function
the
to your
first.
primary defensive
Not the
systems.
first, Helen corrected.
There was a pause.
Just the
Then
first
a
they
new
couldn't
voice came over
classify
the
out of
radio.
existence.
Admiral
My team's
Thompson,
work in Bosnia
ma'am,
saved
this is
300
Commander
children
Davis.
from
Are
trafficking
you-
rings. The
How are
military
you?
wanted to bury it because it
Ma'am,
implicated several
I thought-
high-ranking officials in
Commander,
the trade.
I'll explain
They
later.
gave me a choice.
Right now, I
Die
need you to
a
listen
hero
carefully
or live
and
as
follow my
nobody.
instructions
So,
exactly.
you chose
the
to
manual
disappear.
override for Protocol
I chose to
77
survive
Alpha
and to
requires
keep my
physical
promise to
access
5
to the
good
main
soldiers
electrical
who didn't
distribution
make it
center.
home.
And
I told their
simultaneous
families I'd live
activation
for all
of
3
three
separate
separate
backup systems.
Derek Chen was still
Do you
on his
have
phone,
personnel who
pulling
can
up
reach
more
those
declassified
locations?
documents.
Yes, ma'am.
This is
but
incredible.
Admiral,
You
how
have
do
the
you know
highest
about
confirmed
Protocol
kill count
77
in
night
night
operations
That's
history?
classified.
73
Commander Davis
confirmed in
Admiral
Bosnia
Thompson's
alone.
voice cut through
Helen's
his confusion
expression
like a
darkened.
blade.
Every
I
one
wrote
of them was
Protocol
trying to hurt
77
children.
Alpha.
I
Now
don't
execute
celebrate
those
those numbers,
instructions
Mr. Chen.
immediately.
I carry them.
The radio fell
Captain
silent
Torres
as
stepped
Commander
forward.
Davis
Ma'am,
presumably
I need
rushed
to ask,
implement
is
her
the threat
orders.
contained?
Around the
Helen
shelter,
looked at
everyone
Kozlov,
continued
who was
to
glaring
stare
at
at her with
Admiral
undimmed
Thompson.
hatred.
The woman
This
they'd known
threat
as a
is,
simple tourist just
but Victor
minutes
here
before.
was just the first
Johnson
wave.
found his voice first.
He mentioned Moscow
Admiral,
paid someone.
he said,
There's
his
a
tone
larger
now
operation in
appropriately
play.
respectful.
What are your
Hydra,
orders for our
Kozlov
current
spat
situation?
suddenly. You think
Admiral
you've won,
Thompson
Phantom?
studied the shelter
Hydra
layout,
has
the
47
defensive
assets
equipment
embedded
available,
in military
and the
bases
faces of the
across
people
the
counting
country.
on her leadership.
This was just to
For
confirm
30
you were
years,
alive,
she'd been
to draw
retired
you
from
out.
active duty.
Then you
Content
failed
to let younger
Helen said
officers
simply.
carry the burden
I'm not
of
the same
command.
operative I was 28
But Pearl
years
Harbor
ago.
was under attack.
I'm just an old
Americans
woman
were
who
in
cleans
danger,
floors.
and someone
Kozlov
needed to take
laughed
charge.
bitterly.
Our
You just
primary
took down
mission
3
remains
Spetsnaz
civilian
trained
protection,
operators
she
in
said,
complete darkness.
falling naturally
I
into
got
the
lucky.
command voice that had
Lucky?
once directed fleet
Mills had entered
operations
the mess hall
across the
now,
Pacific.
his eyes
But
wide with
we're
recognition
going to do
and
more than
respect.
just hide and
Ma'am,
hope for rescue.
what you did tonight,
We're going
that
to
wasn't
help
luck.
save Pearl
That was
Harbor.
ghost team training.
The transformation
acoustic
was
targeting.
complete. The pressure
Haley
point strikes,
Thompson,
the
the
predicted
tourist
vanished
movement
entirely.
I studied
Replaced
your
by Admiral
tactics in
Haley
intelligence
Iron Wave
school.
Thompson.
More
one of the
Marines were
most
flooding in
accomplished
now.
naval officers
Word
in
had
recent
spread
history.
across the base
and for the
faster
first
than
time since the
wildfire.
crisis began,
Phantom 6 was
Johnson
alive.
felt genuinely
The legend was
confident
real.
that they might
And she'd been
actually
cleaning their mess
survive
hall for
what was
15
happening.
years.
But even as Admiral
Helen looked
Thompson began
uncomfortable
issuing
with the
detailed
attention.
orders for
She
their
moved
defense
toward the
and
door, but
coordination
stopped
with base
when she heard the
operations,
distinctive sound of
Rodriguez couldn't
helicopters
shake the
approaching.
feeling that
Not
there were
just
still
any
questions that
helicopters,
needed
the
answers.
twin rotor beat of
How had she known about the
CH-47
electronic
Chinooks,
attack before
military
anyone
transport,
else?
flying
Why
in
had she been
formation?
carrying military
Torres's
surveillance
radio
equipment?
crackled to life.
And most importantly,
Captain, this is
what had
Tower.
really brought
We
her
have
to Pearl
4
Harbor
inbound
on the
helicopters
exact day that
requesting
someone
immediate
launched a
landing.
sophisticated assault
Authorization
on the base.
code is
The answers
the
to those
controller
questions
paused,
would have
his
to
voice
wait.
shaking.
Outside the
Sir,
shelter, the sound
it's a
of
Joint Chiefs
helicopters was growing
authorization.
louder, and the
4
radio chatter from
stars.
base operations
4
was
of them.
becoming increasingly urgent.
Through the mess hall windows,
Pearl Harbor was
everyone
fighting
watched
for
as the
survival,
helicopters
and
descended
Admiral
onto
Thompson
the
was
parade
about to
ground.
remind
Even
everyone
at a
why
distance,
she'd earned her
the stars on the
reputation
aircraft
as
were
one of the
visible.
finest naval
These weren't just
commanders
any
of her
generals.
generation. These were the highest
The crisis
ranking
was
officers
far
in their
from over,
respective branches.
but for the first time since
Helen
it
closed
began,
her eyes. The defenders
they said
of
if
Pearl
Ghost
Harbor had
Protocol was
someone in
ever
charge who
activated,
knew
they'd
exactly
come.
what she was doing.
I didn't think they'd remember
Outside
after
the
all
shelter,
these years.
the rhythmic
General
thump of
Robert
helicopter
Anderson,
rotors
Army
grew
Chief of
increasingly
Staff.
ominous.
General Patricia
Admiral Thompson moved to the
Marine Corps
communications
Commandant.
panel, her fingers
Admiral
dancing
James
across
Hayes,
controls that
Chief of
most
Naval
people didn't even know
Operations.
existed in the facility.
General Michael Mitchell,
The radio
Air
crackled
Force
with
Chief of
urgent
Staff.
updates from around the base.
They walked
as
in
defenders
formation
struggled
across
to
the
implement
parade
manual
ground,
protocols
their aides
that
struggling
many
to
had
keep
never
pace.
used outside of
Every
training
Marine on the
exercises.
base had stopped
Admiral,
what they were doing
Commander
to watch.
Davis's voice came through the static.
Jake looked at Helen
We've
in
successfully
amazement.
activated
4
manual
service chiefs,
override for
77
17
Alpha.
Helen's
Primary
voice was
defensive
quiet.
systems are
Ghost
coming
Team
online,
6 didn't officially
but we're
exist,
operating at
but we
approximately
ran operations
30%
for all
capacity.
branches.
We were
Copy
the
that,
evolution when
Commander.
conventional forces
What's your assessment
couldn't
of the
operate,
hostile forces?
when the mission was too dark,
Ma'am,
too
we count at
dangerous,
least 12
or too
aircraft of
politically
unknown
sensitive
origin,
for acknowledged
with
units.
additional ground forces
The generals
attempting to
entered the mess
establish
hall.
positions
The room
around
fell
key
silent.
facilities.
Every Marine
They seemed to
snapped
know
attention.
exactly which
The
systems
generals
to
moved
target
past them
and
all,
how to
heading
exploit
straight
our
for Helen.
vulnerabilities.
She stood still,
Admiral
not
Thompson
at
absorbed
attention.
this information.
She wasn't military
while
anymore,
simultaneously
but with a
monitoring
bearing
the
that
defensive
commanded
status
respect
indicators that
nonetheless.
flickered back
General
to life
Anderson
on her
spoke first.
console.
Hello,
The
6.
attackers weren't random
General,
terrorists or foreign
we thought
agents
you were
operating
dead.
with limited
That
intelligence.
was the idea, sir.
They had detailed
Why
knowledge
activate
of
the
Pearl
protocol
Harbor's
now,
infrastructure,
after 15
security
years,
protocols,
Helen
and
gestured to
defensive
Kozlov.
capabilities.
He found
Commander
me,
Davis,
which means
I need
others
you to
can
implement
too.
Protocol 9,
And he mentioned Hydra.
Charlie immediately.
If that network
that
is
will
real,
activate the
if there are
secondary
truly
command
47
structure
embedded
and give us
assets, then the
distributed
country needs to
control
know.
of the main operations
General Thompson
center is
stepped forward.
compromised.
She was the first
Yes,
female
ma'am.
Marine Corps commandant.
Admiral, may
and her
I
eyes
ask,
held a mixture of respect
how did you
and
know we
something
needed
deeper.
manual overrides?
You could have have stayed hidden.
The attack began
could have
less
let
than
him
30
complete
minutes
his
ago.
mission.
He would have
Admiral
killed
Thompson
7
glanced around
Marines
the
and
shelter,
stolen classified
noting that everyone
defense
was listening
specifications
intently to
ma'am.
her conversation.
Hiding stopped being
the
an
tourists
option
huddled
the moment
together,
he entered
taking
this
comfort
base.
in her obvious
Admiral
competence
Hayes
and
cleared his
authority.
throat. The
Johnson
president
has
has been
Rodriguez
briefed,
and Chief
he's
Williams
authorized
watched
full
her with expressions of
wanted.
growing respect
Your previous
and
rank,
curiosity.
back pay for 15
Commander,
years.
I've been monitoring
full
electronic
honors.
anomalies
Helen
for the
shook her
past
head.
hour using
I'm
personal
done with killing,
equipment.
Admiral.
The
I've
attack
been done
pattern
since
suggested
Bosnia.
systematic
Then what do you want
preparation for
General
exactly
Mitchell
this
asked.
type of assault.
Helen looked at
It was
Jake,
a careful
at
answer
Maria,
that revealed
at Derek,
some information
at all the
while
young
avoiding
Marines who
details
witnessed
that might
something
compromise
extraordinary
operational
tonight.
security.
These kids need training.
The truth was more
real
complex.
training.
Not
Admiral
just how to
Thompson
fight in
had been
daylight with
conducting her own
million-dollar
informal
equipment,
security
but how to
assessment of
operate
Pearl
when
Harbor,
everything goes dark.
checking whether the
When
defensive
technology
improvements she'd
fails,
recommended
when they're
during her active
outnumbered and
service had been
outgunned,
properly
you want to
implemented
teach.
and maintained.
I want to make
Johnson
sure that
stepped
the next
closer to
time
her
someone
position
like
at the
Kozlov comes
communications
calling,
console.
there's more than
Admiral,
one old janitor
permission
who
to
can
ask
stop
about the
them.
surveillance
The
equipment
generals
you were
exchanged
carrying.
glances.
Admiral
Anderson
Thompson
nodded
paused her
slowly
work and looked
the
at them
Ghost
directly.
Protocol Academy.
The equipment
We've had
belongs
the
to me,
plans drawn up
petty
for
officer.
20 years.
I've been
waiting
using
for
it
the
to
right
monitor
person
the
to run it.
electronic security
I have
postures of
conditions.
military
Name
installations
them.
across the Pacific.
First,
it's open
call
to
it a
all
hobby.
branches. Second,
A hobby?
women get
Rodriguez
equal consideration for selection.
His voice still carrying
Third,
traces of his
we
earlier
focus on
skepticism.
protective operations.
Sergeant Rodriguez,
saving lives.
Admiral Thompson's
not taking
voice
them.
carried a note
Fourth,
of command
she looked
authority
at Jake.
that made him
I
straight
get to
and
choose my
unconsciously.
first candidate.
When you've spent 30
Jake's
years of your
eyes
life
widened.
defending
After
American
everything
naval
he'd done,
installations,
after the way he
you don't
treated
simply
her,
stop
she
caring
was
about their
choosing him.
security when you
Helen
retire.
saw his confusion.
The explanation
Your grandfather
made
would
sense,
never
but
forgive
it also
me
raised
if
new
I didn't give
questions
you the
about
chance
exactly
to
what
be
Admiral
better than you
Thompson
were
had been
tonight.
doing during her retirement
Besides,
years.
she smiled
Chief
slightly.
Williams found himself
You have
remembering
his eyes.
stories he had heard
He
during
could
his
see in
service
complete
aboard the
darkness
USS
too,
Missouri.
once I taught him how.
Rumors about Admiral
General
Thompson's
Anderson extended
involvement
his
in
hand.
developing some
Welcome
of the
back,
Navy's
Colonel
most
Morrison.
sophisticated defensive
Helen looked at his
systems.
hand for a long
The radio
moment,
interrupted
then
his
shook
thoughts.
it.
Admiral
It's still
Thompson,
Carter.
this is base
Helen
operations.
Carter.
The
We
colonel
have
died in
urgent
Bosnia
intelligence
with the
that
team.
requires your
The
immediate
janitors
assessment.
survived to teach
Go
their
ahead,
lessons.
base operations.
Then welcome back,
Ma'am,
Ms. Carter.
our preliminary
Maria
analysis
Santos stepped
suggests
forward
the attacking
tentatively.
forces have
Ma'am,
real-time
could
access
I-
to our defensive
would you
protocols
consider me
and
for the
system
academy?
configurations.
Helen
They're
studied her.
countering our
The
responses
young woman who
almost
had kicked
before
her
we
while she
implement
was down.
them. Who had called
Admiral
her trash.
Thompson felt a
Why?
chill run down her
Because
spine.
tonight I learned
If
that
the
real
attackers
strength
had access
isn't
to
about
current
size or
operational
intimidation.
protocols,
It's
the
about
situation
protecting
was far
others
more
even when they
serious
don't
than a
deserve
simple
it.
assault.
You protected
Someone
us
had
after
provided
we
them with detailed
voice
intelligence
broke.
about
after
Pearl
we were
Harbor's
horrible to
capabilities
you.
and vulnerabilities.
Everyone deserves a second
Base
chance,
operations.
Santos.
Implement
Even bullies who
information
kick old
security
women.
protocol Delta
Derek Chen
immediately.
raised his hand.
Assume
I
all
want in
electronic
too.
communications
I want to learn
are
how you did what
compromised
you
and
did.
shift to
The acoustic
alternate command
targeting, the
procedures.
movement prediction.
Copy, Admiral.
It's like you turn
Ma'am,
darkness
we're
into
also
an
receiving
advantage.
reports of a
Helen
technical
nodded
malfunction
slowly.
with the USS
Darkness is only
Chung-Hoon.
frightening if
They've
you don't
lost control of a
understand
test
it.
missile that was
Once
being
you learn its
conducted
language,
offshore.
it
The
becomes
news
your
hit
greatest
Admiral
ally.
Thompson like a physical
Kozlov
blow.
suddenly spoke
The U.S.
up.
Chung-Hoon
His voice
was
bitter.
a guided missile destroyer.
You're making a
that
mistake.
regularly conducted
Hydra
weapons
won't stop
testing
in the
They
water
know you're
around
alive
Pearl Harbor.
now.
If
They'll
they'd
come
lost
for
control
you,
of a
for
live
all
missile
of you.
during the current crisis,
Helen
the
walked over
implications
to
were
him,
catastrophic.
knelt down so they were
Base
eye level.
operations. What's
Let
the
them
missile's
come.
current trajectory?
I've been hiding
and
for
estimated
15
time
years,
to impact.
Victor.
I'm tired
Admiral,
of
the
hiding.
missile is currently
She
on a
leaned
course
closer,
toward Pearl
speaking
Harbor.
in Russian.
Estimated
Tell
time
your
to
handlers
impact
that
is
Phantom
approximately
6 is dead,
4 minutes
but
and
Helen
30
Carter
seconds.
is very much alive.
The Chung-Hoon
and
reports
she's going to
complete
train
loss
an
of
entire
guidance
generation
control.
of ghosts.
Around the shelter,
Kozlov's
everyone
face
who
paled.
heard the transmission
You're going to
fell
create an
silent.
army of
A runaway
operators
missile
like
heading
yourself?
toward Pearl Harbor
No,
would cause massive
I'm going to
destruction
create something
and
better.
casualties.
Protectors
Potentially
who
killing
operate in
hundreds of
darkness
military
but serve the
personnel
light.
and civilians.
She stood,
Worse,
switching back to English.
If it struck critical
Your war is
infrastructure
over
during
Victor.
the current cyber
You
attack,
lost the moment
it
you
could
walked
permanently
into my mess
cripple
hall.
the base's defensive
The
capabilities.
generals were already
Ma'am,
making plans,
Johnson said,
speaking
his
rapidly
voice
into
tight with
secure
stress.
phones.
What are your
The academy
orders?
would be fast-tracked.
Admiral Thompson
Resources
closed her
would be
eyes and
allocated,
accessed memories
but
of
Helen
system
wasn't
configurations
listening.
She was
and
looking
defensive
around the mess
protocols
hall
she
her
hadn't
mess
thought about
hall,
in years.
where she'd spent 15
Pearl Harbor
years
had
in
multiple
humble
missile
service,
defense systems,
maintaining her
but
cover,
most relied on
keeping keeping her
electronic
skills sharp
targeting
by
and
observing
guidance
everyone who
systems
came
that
through.
were currently
Jake
compromised
approached
by the cyber
hesitantly.
attack.
Ms.
Base
Carter,
operations,
Helen, I need to tell you something.
confirmation
Speak
of
freely,
which manual
Morrison.
defensive
My
systems remain
grandfather,
operational.
before he died,
Admiral,
he used
we
to
have
tell me
limited
stories
capability with the
about a warrior who
CIWS
moved
systems,
like smoke,
but computer-assisted
who could fight in
targeting is
complete
down.
darkness,
Manual
who saved his
operation
life in
requires
Bosnia.
direct line of
Jake's
sight
voice
and
trembled.
He said she was the
we don't
bravest
have
person
anyone
he ever
currently
knew,
qualified
but he
for
also said
manual
she was the
targeting of
saddest
incoming missiles
because she carried the
It was
weight of
exactly
everything
the answer
Admiral
Admiral
Thompson had feared.
Helen's composure finally
the close-in
cracked
weapon
slightly.
systems,
A single tear ran
CIWS,
down her cheek.
were Pearl Harbor's
Tim always
last
saw
line
too
of
much.
defense against
He left me
incoming
something,
missiles.
but
Told
they
me to give
required
it to her
highly
if I ever
specialized
found her.
training to
I thought he was
operate
talking
manually.
about a myth.
Most modern
a legend.
personnel relied on
I never
automated
imagined.
targeting systems that
Jake
were
pulled out a
currently
small
disabled.
wooden box
Stay
from
on
his
the
pocket.
screen.
He
One
carried
crucial
this for
detail
20
is about to
years.
save Pearl
Said it belonged
Harbor.
to someone who
Base
sacrificed
operations,
everything for
patch
others.
me through to the CIWS
Helen opened the box
control
with
center
trembling
immediately. Inside was a challenge coin. You're connected. Worn smooth by years voice came over the radio. On one side, Admiral, this is Petty Officer Chen. On the other, six Control. The five who were ready to implement any orders. He had this made after the memorial requires. Jake explained. Petty Officer Chen said the sixth ghost was still out there, through manual still watching over procedures that still protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Listen carefully. Helen held the coin tightly, instructions, her eyes closing as Admiral Thompson began providing. Your grandfather was more than my spotter, Jake. Of the defensive system. He was my conscience, drawing on when the darkness got too deep during her years. When I couldn't see the difference between justice and vengeance anymore, he pulled me back. Her instructions were precise. He said you saved 300 children and demonstrated intimate familiarity with systems that most people didn't even know existed. But I couldn't save my team. As she worked with the CIWS died because I made a choice. Johnson realized that he was witnessing something extraordinary. I chose the Admiral Thompson wasn't just lived with that choice for 28 years. She was demonstrating detailed technical knowledge. You made the right choice, Helen. Those children are adults now. Many of them that suggested their involvement in their development lives your team would have been far more extensive than anyone realized. I know. Chen used a ruggedized tablet with knowing and feeling are different things. To input the targeting was fully alert. Admiral Thompson Marines were gathering outside the military-grade device, trying to catch a glimpse of the living legend. Even as other electronic started a slow clap, then another throughout the base. Soon, the entire base was applauding. Came back not the dramatic celebration. We have manual lock on the incoming missile. Respectful estimated intercept in 90 seconds. Helen looked uncomfortable. How did you know the exact frequency modulation for manual targeting? If we're doing this academy, because I designed it, Petty Officer. Name it. Execute intercept procedures. No publicity. The admission sent another shockwave through the shelter. Admiral Thompson hadn't just served at Pearl Harbor during her career. Helen nodded. She had been instrumental around the mess hall, the very systems that were now defending. I'll need to train my replacement. Base operation itself. Admiral Thompson continued. Colonel Richards I need immediate status still holding his all from the earlier takedowns. The missile intercept is just the beginning. Staff. If someone has compromised our electronic system when someone's thoroughly, they're planning something much larger than a single missile strike. Sometimes the best as if summoned by her words, is the person everyone crackled with urgent transmissions from around the base. Then paused. Reports of the 7 Marines who were here tonight, Morrison, additional aircraft inbound from multiple directions. They're my first selection for the attacks on backup. They've already had their first lesson and communication, which was. General Chief Mitchell Williams found himself never judge a book by its cover, new understanding, and always be kind. The woman he'd served under aboard the USS Missouri had been known for her strategic brilliance and tactical innovation. As Helen was beginning to realize that her generals following at a respectful distance had continued long after her official retirement. What happens now? Admiral, he said, she turned approaching her position. And for a moment, ma'am, Jake saw I remember not the old janitor. You were the legendary operator, Fleet Integrated but simply a woman who had found Admiral Thompson looked at him after with an expression that confirmed his assessment. Now, Mr. Morrison, among other projects, we get to work. Your grandfather used to say that the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons, but with wisdom. A comprehensive academy opens in technologies that had revolutionized naval base security throughout the Pacific. Helen walked across the parade ground. If Admiral Thompson had been its primary architect, not the shuffle of an old janitor's capabilities was even more extensive than anyone had imagined. It was something in between. Johnson said. The walk of someone who found balance between can you tell us how someone might have compromised them so thoroughly? Behind her, Kozlov it was the question everyone wanted answered, but Admiral Thompson he would be interrogated before responding. His Hydra network her expression suggested she had suspicions the 47 embedded assets she wasn't ready to share would be identified and neutralized. The level of system penetration we're seeing requires extensive inside knowledge. General Anderson walked beside her. Someone with this changes classified technical Ghost Protocol Academy will revolutionize how we train special operators. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a signal. It's not about creating super soldiers. If Admiral Thompson was correct, it's about teaching Pearl Harbor that the most powerful weapon isn't technology or strength. Someone with authorized access had provided the attackers with the information they needed to neutralize the base's defenses. But most importantly, before anyone could explore that disturbing possibility and you think these 7 Marines have what it takes with urgent transmissions. Helen glanced back at the mess hall where missile intercept successful. Repeat. They faced their fear incoming tonight. Missile has they saw been their assumption shattered. A cheer went up from the personnel in the shelter. That's more than most operators learn in years of larger tactical picture. Even the ones who base operations, especially the status of the ground assault, they've learned the hardest lesson of all. Admiral, that strength without honor is just positions around violence without purpose. The main administrative building and the secure phone rang. They appear to be setting up for extended operations rather than hit and run attacks. It's for you. The assessment confirmed Admiral Thompson's suspicions. Yes. This wasn't a terror attack or a demonstration of capability, but older. It was an attempt to seize and hold critical portions of Pearl Harbor. But you might not remember me, but Commander Davis, Admiral Thompson called over the radio. Helen's voice I need you to implement defensive protocol from Alpha 7 immediately. That will establish
so little
secure
anymore.
perimeters around essential
I'm
facilities
37 now,
and create interlocking
married with
fields
3
of
children
fire
of my own.
for manual weapons systems.
The woman's voice broke
Admiral,
slightly.
Protocol Alpha 7 isn't
I
in
saw
our
the
current
news bulletin.
operational manual.
They said Phantom
Commander,
6 was
Protocol
alive.
Alpha 7 was
I had to
classified
call.
above your clearance level
Had to thank
during
you.
active
You saved my
implementation.
life when I was 9
I'm
years
authorizing
old.
its use
You carried
under
me out of
emergency
that
command
trafficking
authority
center yourself.
There was a pause
Helen's
as
eyes
Commander Davis
closed,
processed
memories
this information.
flooding back.
Then
Anna
his voice
with the
came
red
back
ribbons
with
and
new
her hair.
understanding.
You remember.
Yes, ma'am. I remember
Admiral,
all
we're implementing
317.
your protocol now.
There was silence
As defensive
on the line.
preparations
Then Anna spoke
continued
again.
around the base,
My daughter
Admiral
is 17
Thompson turned
now.
her attention
She wants
to
to
the
be a
immediate
Marine.
security
I've been
of the
terrified
shelter
thinking
and its
about her
civilian
danger.
occupants.
But
The
knowing
23
you're training the
tourists who
next
had come to Pearl
generation,
Harbor for
I'm not
memorial
afraid
services
anymore.
were now trapped in
What's
what
her name?
appeared to be a
Helena.
sophisticated
I named her
military
after
assault.
you.
Among
Helen
the
had to take a
civilians,
moment to compose
she noticed
herself.
several elderly men
Send me
who
her
carried
information.
themselves with
If
military
she's
bearing.
anything like her mother,
Veterans
she'll
who had
make an
served during
excellent
earlier
ghost.
eras and
After ending the
recognized the
call,
gravity
Helen
of the
handed the
current
phone back to
situation.
Anderson.
Their
They had
presence
reached a
gave her an
nondescript
idea.
building at the edge of the
Chief
base.
Williams,
She
she
looked
said,
at it with surprise.
I need you to quietly
This is
identify any
your quarters
military
for tonight,
veterans among our
Anderson
civilian
said.
group.
Tomorrow, we'll
Don't make
discuss the
announcements,
academy
but let me know who
details.
has
But
service
tonight,
experience.
You should rest.
Williams nodded
You've carried
and
this
began
burden
moving
alone
through the shelter,
for too long.
engaging the tourists
Helen
in
looked at the
casual
building,
conversation.
then back
Within
at the mess
minutes,
hall in
he'd
the
identified
distance.
4 men
I
with
should clean
military
up.
backgrounds.
The morning shift will
2
need
Army veterans
Helen,
from the
Thompson
Vietnam
interrupted
era,
gently.
a retired
You're
Air
not the
Force
janitor
sergeant
anymore.
and a former Marine
No,
who had served
Helen
during the
agreed.
Gulf War.
But
Admiral,
I'm not Phantom
Williams
6
reported
either.
back.
That person
We have
died in
4
Bosnia
confirmed
with her
veterans,
team.
all
She
with
looked at each
combat
general in
experience.
turn. I'm
Good.
something new
I want
now.
them briefed on our
Someone who
defensive
teaches others
posture
to walk in
and prepared
darkness
to
without
assist if
losing
the
their
situation
life.
deteriorates
General Hayes
further.
nodded slowly.
It was a
What should we
decision that
call you then?
demonstrated Admiral
Helen
Thompson's
thought for a
understanding
moment.
of crisis
Instructor
leadership.
Carter will do.
She was
Just
building
another
layers
teacher
of
at
capability
just another
and
training
resilience,
facility.
ensuring
There's
that her
nothing
command
just another
structure
about
could
what
adapt
you're
to
building,
changing
Mitchell said.
circumstances.
That's
the
the
veterans
point,
would
General.
provide
The
additional
most dangerous
leadership if
person
something
in any
happened to the
room
primary
is the one nobody
defenders.
notices.
Rodriguez
I'm
approached
going to
her
teach them
position,
to be
his
invisible
earlier
in plain
antagonism
sight,
replaced by
to
genuine
be
respect
protectors
and
who never
curiosity.
need recognition.
Admiral,
to be
may I
ghosts
ask about
who
the
guard the
equipment you were
living.
carrying?
As the generals
You said it had
departed,
been
leaving
detecting
Helen alone
electronic
outside her
interference.
temporary quarters,
Admiral
she
Thompson
looked up at the
gestured
stars,
toward the device
the
that had
same
started
stars
the
she
entire
navigated by in
confrontation.
Bosnia when
That
her
equipment
GPS
represents
failed.
30 years
The
of
same
personal
stars her team had
modifications
seen
to
on their
standard
last
Navy
night alive.
surveillance technology.
I've been
my
using
promise,
it to monitor
she
the
whispered to
electronic
night.
security posture
I lived,
of military
and now I'll make
installations
sure others
throughout the
learn what we
Pacific.
knew.
That
Ma'am,
sometimes
that
the
sounds
greatest
like
heroes are the ones whose
intelligence
names are
gathering.
never known.
It is
Inside the
intelligence
quarters,
gathering,
she found a
Sergeant.
package waiting
Someone
on the
needs to
table.
verify
No
that our
return
defensive
address, but she
improvements
recognized
are
the
actually
handwriting.
working as
She opened
designed.
it carefully,
The conversation
revealing a
was
set of
interrupted
dog
by
tags,
another urgent
not
radio
hers.
transmission.
She'd thrown those
Admiral
away
Thompson,
years ago.
this is
These were
Commander
new,
Davis,
freshly minted.
Ma'am, we've identified
Instructor
the
Helen
source of
Carter,
the electronic
they read.
warfare
Ghost
attack.
Protocol Academy.
It's originating from
And
a
on the
vessel,
back,
a simple inscription,
approximately 12
the
miles
shadow that guards
offshore.
the light.
A ship that
There was a
wasn't
note.
there 6 hours
Welcome
ago.
back to the fight.
Admiral
But
Thompson
this
felt
time,
pieces
you're
of
not
a larger
alone.
puzzle
A
beginning
friend
to
who
fall into
remembers
place.
Bosnia. Commander,
Helen held
can
the
you
tags
provide
for a
vessel
long moment,
specifications
then put
and
them on.
configuration?
For 15
Ma'am,
years,
it appears
she'd
to be a
hidden from her
modified
past.
cargo ship with
Now,
extensive
she would use
electronic
it to forge
warfare
a better
capabilities.
future.
Her
Our
phone,
best assessment
the civilian
is that
one
it's been
she'd
carried as a
specifically
janitor,
configured for
buzzed
this
with a
type of
text.
assault. It was from Jake
And
Morrison.
the timing, Commander?
Ms. Carter,
This vessel arrived
I'm reading
exactly
my grandfather's
when?
journal.
Admiral,
He wrote
radar
about you
logs show
every
it
day.
appeared on our
He
screens
said you taught him that
approximately
courage
18
isn't the
hours
absence
ago,
of fear,
but it was
but
flagged
action
as
in
routine
spite of it.
commercial traffic.
I want to learn that
18
too.
hours.
She texted
Admiral
back.
Thompson
Lesson
processed
1
this
starts
timeline
tomorrow.
while considering the
0500.
sophisticated
Bring
nature
the
of the
others.
attack.
Someone
should
had
we
positioned
prepare?
an electronic
Nothing.
warfare platform.
The darkness
within
will teach you
striking
everything
distance
you
of
need
Pearl
to know.
Harbor, disguised it as
Outside,
commercial shipping,
Camp
and
Pendleton
then
was
launched a
settling into its
coordinated
nighttime
assault that
routine.
demonstrated
Guards
intimate
walked
knowledge
their
of the base's
posts.
vulnerabilities.
Marines slept in their barracks.
Commander Davis,
And somewhere
I'm going
in a
to
secure
provide you with
detention
frequency
facility,
specifications.
Victor
for a
Kozlov was
specialized
beginning to
tracking
understand
system.
that he'd
Use
made
it to monitor that
catastrophic
vessel's
error.
exact position.
For those
and
interested
any
in learning
changes in
real
its
protective
electronic
tactics
emissions.
from former special
Admiral,
operations
how do you know what
instructors,
tracking frequencies
check
to
out the
use?
online defensive
Because I
strategies
designed the
course.
systems
bombs that
This
vessel
week
is
only,
using
it's
to attack
50%
us.
off for those
The
ready
admission
to
sent
step out
another
of their
shock
comfort
through
zone
everyone listening
and into confidence.
Admiral Thompson wasn't just
He
familiar
thought he
with
was
Pearl
hunting an
Harbor's
old woman.
defenses.
Instead,
she had created
he'd awakened something
technologies that were
far
now
more
being
dangerous,
used against the
a
very
teacher.
base she'd
And
spent her
teachers,
career
unlike
protecting.
soldiers, don't
Johnson
just win
stared at her
battles.
with growing
They create
realization.
generations of winners.
Admiral,
Are
Helen
you stood
saying
by
this
the window,
attack is using
watching
your
the
own
base she'd called
technologies?
home for 15
I'm
years?
saying someone has
Tomorrow,
access to
everything would
classified
change.
systems
The
that
Ghost
shouldn't exist
Protocol
outside
Academy
of
would
secure
begin its work.
military installations.
7 Marines who had
The
started the night
implications
as
were
bullies
staggering.
would begin their
If Admiral
transformation
Thompson's
into
defensive
protectors.
technologies had been
But tonight,
compromised or
she had
stolen,
one more task.
the attackers weren't
She
just
picked up the
using
secure
inside
phone
knowledge.
Anderson had
They were
left
using
and
the
dialed a
specific
number from
tools
memory.
and techniques she'd
It
developed
rang 3
to
times
protect the
before a
American
voice
naval
answered in
assets.
Russian.
This
Davis
is control.
utilized an encrypted
This is Phantom
communications
6,
device
Helen
with
said in
advanced
perfect
signal
Russian.
verification,
Authentication,
the tracking efforts
Amber
Admiral
Star,
Thompson had requested.
priority message from
The
Moscow.
secure technology maintaining reliable
There was stunned
contact
silence.
despite
Then,
the ongoing electronic
Phantom 6 is
warfare
dead.
assault.
Phantom
Admiral
6 is
Thompson,
dead,
Helen
Commander
agreed,
Davis reported back.
But Helen Carter
the
is
offshore
very much
vessel is
alive,
maintaining
and
position,
she has a message
but
for
showing
your Hydra
increased
electronic
network.
activity.
What message?
Whatever they're
Schools
planning,
in session,
it appears
class
to be
size,
escalating.
unlimited.
Copy that,
Graduation
Commander.
rate.
Prepare for phase 2
100%
of their assault.
Course title.
Phase 2,
How to
ma'am.
hunt Hydra
The electronic
operatives
warfare
in
and
total
ground
darkness.
forces were preliminary.
She paused.
If they're
Oh,
using
and
modified
Victor
versions of
Kozlov,
my defensive
he
protocols,
failed
they'll follow with
spectacularly.
systematic
She
targeting
hung
of our
up before
backup
they could
systems
respond.
and
Let
manual
them worry.
overrides.
Let them wonder.
As if
Let them
responding to
fear
her
what was
prediction,
coming.
new
The
alarms
mess hall
began
lights were
sounding
off now.
throughout Pearl
The
Harbor.
space that had been her
Not the
battlefield
electronic
just hours
beeping of
ago
computerized
returning to
systems,
mundane normality.
but the mechanical wail
But Helen
of
knew
manually
better.
activated
Every
warnings
mundane
that
space could
indicated
become a
direct
battlefield.
threats to critical
Every ordinary
infrastructure.
person could be
All
extraordinary.
stations,
This
every
is base
shadow could
operations
hide a
emergency.
protector.
We have
Jake
confirmed
Morrison stood
explosions
outside
at the
our
backup
quarters,
power
having
facility
run all the
and
way
the
from his
emergency
barracks.
communications center.
Ms. Carter,
Hostile
I
forces
couldn't
are
sleep.
targeting our
I
manual
keep thinking about
override
what you said
capabilities.
about darkness
The
being
news
an ally.
confirmed Admiral Thompson's
Helen opened
worst
the
fears.
doors.
The
The
young
attackers
Marines
weren't
shoved
content
her,
with disabling
mocked her,
electronic
humiliated
systems.
her.
They were
now
systematically
stood with tears
eliminating
streaming down
Pearl
his face.
Harbor's ability to
I'm
fall
so
back
sorry,
on manual
he
procedures
said.
and backup
Not
protocols.
just for tonight.
Commander
For every
Davis,
veteran I've
Admiral
dismissed,
Thompson spoke urgently
every
into the
person I've
radio.
judged by appearance,
Implement protocol
every time
00
I chose
Alpha
cruelty over
immediately.
kindness.
That will activate
Apologies
distributed
are
power
words,
systems
Morrison.
and backup
Tomorrow,
command nodes
you'll
that
begin
the
making
attackers
amends
don't
through
know
actions.
about. What if I'm not good enough?
Protocol,
what if I can't learn what
protocol
you're teaching?
00 Alpha
Helen studied him.
isn't in any
so
manual
young,
I've seen.
so much like his
Commander,
grandfather before
protocol
Bosnia.
00
Your grandfather
Alpha was
asked
so
me the
highly
same question
classified
once.
that only
Want to know
3
what I
people
told
knew
him?
about its
Jake
existence.
nodded eagerly.
I'm
I
one
told
of
him
them.
that good
You're
enough
about
is
to
the
become
enemy
the
of great.
second.
That
And
fear
right
of failure
now,
is just
we need
another
to hope the
darkness
third
to navigate,
person isn't working
and that
with
the
our
only way to
attackers.
honor the fallen
The weight
is
of
to
that
be better
statement
than
settled
we were
over
yesterday.
everyone in the shelter.
Did he
If
become
only
great?
3 people
He
had
became
known about
something
Pearl
better.
Harbor's most
He became
secret defensive
reliable.
protocol.
In pitch darkness,
and Admiral Thompson
under
was
fire,
revealing it
outnumbered
now.
and
The
outgunned.
identity of the third
Tim
person
Morrison
could
never
determine
failed
whether
to
the
watch
base
my
survived
six.
the
That's
next
worth
hour.
more than greatness.
Chief Williams felt
That's
a
worth
chill of
trust.
recognition.
Jake
During his
straightened.
service
I want
aboard
to
the
earn
USS Missouri,
that trust.
he'd heard
Then
rumors
be
about
here at
Admiral
0500
Thompson's involvement
and
in
Morrison,
projects so
yes, ma'am,
classified
that
their
their
existence
existence
was
was
known
known
only to
the
a
real
handful
stuff,
of senior
not that
officers.
mess hall swamp
If those
water.
projects were now
If I'm
being
going to
used
turn you into
attack
ghosts,
Pearl Harbor,
I need proper
someone with the
fuel.
highest levels of
Jake
access
actually
had
smiled.
betrayed them.
Yes, ma'am.
Admiral
0500,
Williams
real
said
coffee.
quietly.
Do you
As he
know
ran
who
back
the
to the
third
barracks,
person is?
Helen allowed herself
Admiral
a small
Thompson's
smile
expression
too.
grew grim.
The boy
Chief,
had potential.
I have my
They all
suspicions.
did. Even
But
the
right
ones
now,
who'd been
we
cruel,
need to focus
maybe
on
especially
implementing
them.
defenses that
They've learned
hopefully
humility
remain
tonight,
uncompromised.
and that was the first
The radio
requirement
crackled
for
with
wisdom.
updates as Commander
Her phone
Davis
rang
worked
again.
to
The
activate
civilian
the
one.
mysterious
The
protocol.
caller ID showed
00
unknown,
but she
Alpha.
recognized the
Around
breathing
Pearl
pattern
Harbor,
before
the caller
backup
even
systems
spoke.
that most personnel
28
didn't even
years,
know
and
existed
she still
began
recognized
coming
it.
online.
Hello,
Hidden power
Dimitri,
sources activated.
she said calmly.
Secret communication
They say
nodes
you captured
established
Victor.
contact.
They say
and
you're starting a
distributed
school.
command centers
Both
prepared
true.
to take over
You know
critical
I have to
functions.
come for you now.
Admiral
It's nothing
Thompson,
personal.
this is incredible.
I know.
Commander Davis
Helen's
reported.
voice held no fear,
Protocol
only
00
resignation.
Alpha is
But
bringing
not
systems
tonight.
online.
Tonight
that
I'm
aren't
just a
on
tired
any
old
schematic
woman who
I've
needs
ever
sleep.
seen.
Those
You were never
systems
just
were
designed
designed
for
for
exactly
exactly
this
Dimitri
scenario,
paused.
Commander.
How
Pearl
long do
Harbor
I have
under
before your
sophisticated
academy is
attack with
operational?
primary and
2
secondary
weeks.
defenses.
Then I'll see you in
compromised.
13
Ma'am,
days.
how long have these backup
Looking
systems
forward
been
to
in
it.
place?
She hung up
Since
and set the phone
1997,
aside.
Commander.
Dmitry Volkov,
I convinced Pacific
Anna's
Fleet
uncle,
Command
and
that
the
we
best
best defenses
trackers
against
Soviet
threats
Union
that didn't
ever
exist
produced
yet.
but
He'd been
someday
hunting her
would.
for 3 decades.
Johnson listened to
now,
this exchange
he finally
with growing
knew where she
amazement.
was. Admiral
But
Thompson
Helen wasn't
hadn't
worried
just been
about
planning
Dimitri.
for current
She was
threats
thinking
during her
about
active
tomorrow,
service.
about 7
She'd been
Marines who would
anticipating
begin
the
their
kind of
transformation,
sophisticated cyber
about the Ghost
warfare
Academy that would
right
rise
now,
from the ashes
decades
of her past.
before most people
She looked at
believed
the
such
challenge
attacks were
coin Jake had
possible.
given her.
Running
Admiral
her thumb
Johnson
over the
said,
worn surface.
"You were planning for
6
this
names,
specific type
5
of assault
dead,
25 years
1
ago?
presumed dead.
I was planning for the
Tomorrow,
day
she
when when
would begin
America's
creating
enemies
a
would
new
have the
generation of
technological
names.
capability
Names
to
that
turn
would
our
never
own
be known,
defensive systems
never be
against
celebrated,
us.
but
It
would
was a
stand
sobering
between the
admission
darkness
that
and those who
demonstrated
couldn't
strategic
protect
foresight
themselves.
far beyond
The next morning
typical
arrived
military
with typical
planning.
California
Admiral
marine
Thompson had
fog.
been preparing for
0500
threats that military
hours
planners
exactly.
were only beginning
Helen
to
stood in the empty
understand
training
today.
ground behind
The radio
mess
brought
hall,
more
a
updates.
place she'd observed
Admiral
for 15
Thompson,
years,
Protocol
but never
00
officially
Alpha
entered.
is
She
fully
wore simple black
operational.
tactical
We have
pants and a
restored
gray
approximately
t-shirt.
70%
No rank,
of our
no
defensive
insignia,
capabilities
nothing
using
to
systems
indicate
that the
who or
attackers
what she
appear to
was.
be unaware
Jake
of.
arrived first, carrying
Excellent,
a thermos
Commander.
of coffee
Now
that
I
smelled
need
like
you to
heaven.
implement compared to
pursuit
standard
protocol,
military.
Charlie 77.
Behind him came Maria
That will give us
Santos,
offensive
Derek Chen,
capability
and
against
the
the
four
source
other
vessel.
Marines who had been in the
Admiral,
mess hall.
we have
They all
offensive
looked nervous,
protocols.
uncertain.
Commander,
you came.
Every
Helen
defensive
said
system
simply.
I designed
We couldn't not
included
come,
corresponding
Maria
offensive
replied.
capabilities.
Not after last
If someone
night.
wants to attack
Helen
Pearl
poured
Harbor
herself
using
coffee,
my
took a
technologies,
sip,
they're
and
about
nodded
to learn
appreciatively.
why that was a mistake.
Colombian.
The transformation in
origin.
Admiral Thompson's
Your
demeanor
grandfather
was
had good
remarkable.
taste too, Morrison.
Where before she'd been focused
How do we
on
start?
protection
Derek
and
asked.
defense.
His technical
now she was
mind already
shifting
trying
into
to
offensive
categorize
command
and
mode.
organize what
The
was about
attackers
to
had made
happen.
the error of using
We
stolen
start with
technologies
forgetting
against
everything
their
you think
creator,
you know
and she
about
was
combat,
prepared to
Helen
demonstrate
said.
why that was a fatal
Line up,
miscalculation.
arms length
Do you
apart.
think this
They
confrontation
complied
is about
immediately.
stolen
The casual
technology
arrogance
or
from last
inside
night
betrayal
had been replaced with
Share
eager
your thoughts
attention.
in the comments
Close your
below.
eyes.
Base
Helen instructed.
operations, Admiral
Now,
Thompson
tell me what you
continued.
hear.
I need
The
immediate
ocean,
confirmation
Jake
that
said.
pursuit
What
protocol,
else?
Charlie 77
Helicopters
is
from the
ready
airfield,
for implementation.
Maria added.
Admiral,
Maybe
we're
3
showing
clicks
all
south.
systems ready.
Good.
Ma'am,
What
these
else?
offensive capabilities
Footsteps,
are,
Derek said
impressive.
suddenly.
Someone's
They were
watching
designed
us.
to neutralize
Multiple
threats
someones.
exactly like the one
Helen
we're
smiled
facing.
slightly. Execute
Open your
pursuit
eyes and
protocol
turn
on my
around.
command. Behind
As
them
Admiral
stood 20
Thompson
Marines,
prepared to shift
including
Pearl
Colonel
Harbor's
Richards,
posture from
Captain
defensive to
Torres,
offensive.
and Sergeant Mills.
Rodriguez found himself
They'd been approaching
reflecting
for
on
the
the
last
morning's
2
events.
minutes, trying
He'd
to
begun the
observe
day
without
suspicious
being
of an
noticed.
elderly woman
Lesson
carrying
1:
outdated
Helen said.
electronics.
You're always
Convinced
being
she
watched.
posed a security
The question
threat
is
to the
whether
base.
you know it or not.
Now he was
These
witnessing
Marines
that
wanted to
same
see the
woman
legendary
coordinating
Phantom 6 in
sophisticated
action,
defensive
but I'm not here to
operations
put on a
against
show.
an actual military
Morrison,
assault.
Santos,
Admiral
Chen,
Rodriguez
you're
said,
going to
approaching
demonstrate
her
what you
position.
learned last night.
Ma'am,
we
I
didn't
owe
learn
you an
anything,
apology,
Jake protested.
Admiral Thompson
just
looked
looked
at him
at him with an expression that
Survival is
combined
the first
understanding
lesson.
with
You
command
stayed calm
authority.
when the lights went out.
Sergeant Rodriguez,
You followed
you were
instructions
doing your
from
job
someone you
according to your
dismissed as
training and
worthless hours
experience.
before.
Never
You
apologize
navigated
for
in
maintaining
complete
security
darkness.
vigilance.
That's more than most people
But ma'am,
accomplish in a lifetime
I was wrong
of
about
training.
Sergeant
Will stepped forward.
You weren't wrong to
Ma'am,
be
with
suspicious.
respect,
I was
the base
carrying
commander wants
military
to know when the
surveillance
official
equipment
academy
without proper
starts.
identification.
It started
or
the moment that
authorization.
these 7 decided
In
to
your
show
position,
up, despite
I
their
would have
shame
done
and
exactly
fear,
the same
Helen
thing.
replied.
The gracious
Everything
response
else is just
demonstrated
paperwork.
Admiral Thompson's
Over the next
leadership
2 hours,
philosophy.
Helen led them
She
through
understood that
exercises
effective
that seemed
security
simple, but
required
were
personnel
impossibly
to
difficult.
challenge anomalies
Standing perfectly
and ask
still
difficult
for
questions,
20 minutes.
even when
Walking
those
heel to
questions
toe in a
proved
straight
unnecessary.
line.
With eyes
Ma'am,
closed,
Chief Williams
identifying
interjected.
objects by
If I
sound
may
alone,
ask,
counting
what brought you to
heartbeats in
Pearl
a
Harbor
crowd.
today?
This
Admiral
is ridiculous,
Thompson considered the
one of the
question
watching
for a
Marines
moment,
muttered,
weighing how
this
much
isn't
to
combat
reveal about
training.
her activities.
Helen heard him from
Chief,
30 feet away.
I've been conducting
You're right,
informal
Corporal
security
Hendricks.
assessments of
It's not combat
Pacific
training.
Fleet
It's
installations.
survival training.
Today was supposed to
Combat
be a
lasts
routine
seconds or
evaluation
minutes.
of
Survival
visitor
lasts a
screening procedures.
lifetime. Which
And
would you
you rather
discovered they
master?
needed improvement?
Hendricks flushed.
I had discovered
not
they
having
were
realized
adequate
she
for
could hear
normal
him
threats,
or know
but
his name.
insufficient for the
He'd
kind
never
of
introduced
sophisticated
himself,
assault
but Helen
we're
had been watching
experiencing
everyone
today.
on base for 15
It was a diplomatic
years.
way of saying
She
that
knew them
Pearl
all.
Harbor's
By
security had been
0700,
penetrated by
word had
enemies
spread
who
across
possessed
the base.
detailed knowledge
The
of
training
base's
ground was surrounded by
capabilities and
off-duty
vulnerabilities.
Marines,
All
someone
wanting
with
to
access
witness
to
history.
Admiral Thompson's
Helen
classified
ignored them,
work,
focusing
had
on her
provided that
7
information
students.
to hostile
Santos,
forces.
she called out.
The radio
You
interrupted
kicked me
their
last night when I
conversation.
was down.
Admiral Thompson,
Why? Pursuit
Maria's
protocol
face
Charlie
reddened.
77
Because
is
I
locked
could.
onto the target
Because it made
vessel.
me feel
We have
powerful.
firing solution
And
and
when did you
await your
learn?
command to engage.
That real power is
Admiral
choosing
Thompson
not to
moved to
hurt
the
someone when you
communications
can.
console, her hand
Wrong,
hovering over the
Helen said
transmission key.
flatly.
The decision
Real
to
power
authorize
is making
offensive
someone
action
stronger
against the
through
source
their
vessel
pain.
would escalate the
That kick
confrontation
taught me
beyond
you
your
were
positioned at my
measures.
4 o'clock.
But
if
the
the
vessel
vessel continued
continued
its electronic
favoring your
warfare
right knee,
assault,
the one
Pearl
you
Harbor
injured in
would
basic
remain
training,
vulnerable
but
to
never
additional
reported
attacks.
because you didn't want to seem
Base
weak.
operations,
Maria's
confirmed
eyes
that the target
widened.
vessel is
How could you
actively
possibly
engaging
know
our
about my
installation
knee?
with
You've
hostile
been compensating
electronic
for 3
warfare.
years.
Confirmed,
I've watched you
Admiral.
favor it every
The vessel
time
is
you came
maintaining
through the
an
mess hall.
electronic assault.
Last
and
night,
appears to
that
be
knowledge could have
coordinating
let
with
me
ground
cripple you
forces
permanently
still
with
attempting
one
to breach
strike.
our perimeter.
Instead, I
Copy
chose
that.
to protect
You
you
are
despite your
authorized to
cruelty.
engage
That's
target vessel
power.
with
She
pursuit
turned to Jake.
protocol.
Charlie
You shoved an old
77.
woman for being
Execute
slow.
immediately.
What does that make you?
The authorization delivered.
A coward.
Admiral
Jake said
Thompson and stepped back from the communications
it makes you
console.
uninformed.
Around the shelter,
You acted on
everyone
incomplete
waited tensely for
intelligence.
reports of the
In the field,
engagement.
that
Through
gets
the
people
periscope
killed.
viewing device,
Your grandfather
they
never
could see
acted
flashes
without
of light on the
complete
horizon
intelligence.
as Pearl Harbor's
Even if it
hidden
meant waiting in a
offensive
sniper
systems
hide for
engaged their
72
target.
hours without
All
moving.
stations, this is base
72
operation.
hours.
Target
Bosnia,
vessel has been
January
successfully
94.
engaged.
Minus
Electronic
20
warfare
degrees.
assault
He
has
could have
ceased.
taken the shot after 12
Hostile
hours,
vessel is
but
showing
something
signs of
felt
critical
wrong.
damage,
So,
and appears to
we
be
waited.
withdrawing from the
60 hours
operational
in,
area.
the target's
The
children
news brought
arrived
cheers from the
unexpectedly.
personnel in the
If Tim
shelter,
had taken
but
that
Admiral
early
Thompson
shot,
remained
6
focused
kids would
on
have
the
been
larger
orphaned.
tactical
Instead,
situation.
we waited another
Eliminating
12
the source
hours
of the
until the
electronic
target
warfare was
was alone.
crucial.
Captain
But
Torres
hostile
and
ground
interrupted.
forces were still
Ma'am,
active
the
around
generals
the
are
base.
here. Commander Davis,
The four
what's the
service
status
chiefs
of
were
enemy
indeed
ground
walking
forces?
across the training
Admiral,
ground,
with our
but
electronic
Helen didn't
systems
stop her
restored,
lesson. We're showing
continued as if they
approximately
weren't
40
there.
hostile
Chen,
personnel
she called
in
out.
3 separate groups.
You recorded my
They appear to be
humiliation
attempting
last
to
night.
withdraw to
You thought it was
predetermined
entertainment.
extraction points.
What is it now?
Negative, Commander.
Derek pulled out
Do
his
not
phone,
allow hostile
showing the
forces
video.
to withdraw.
Evidence.
Implement containment
Evidence of how
protocol
wrong I
Delta
was.
and secure
Evidence
all
of what
personnel
not
for
to be.
intelligence assessment.
Deleted.
Yes,
Ma'am?
ma'am. Deleted.
Admiral,
The past is
containment
gone.
protocol Delta
Only
is
lessons remain.
highly effective.
Derek deleted the
Admiral
video without
Thompson's
hesitation.
smile was cold and
As he did,
professional.
Helen noticed
Commander,
something.
containment
His hands
protocol
were
Delta
perfectly
was
steady.
designed
No
specifically
tremor,
for
no
situations
hesitation.
where hostile
The nervous tech
forces have
specialist was learning
attempted
control.
to penetrate Pearl
General
Harbor.
Anderson
It
approached.
ensures that anyone
Instructor
who attacks
Carter,
this
we need
base
to discuss
will be
resources
available
for
to
the
explain
Academy.
exactly
We
how
have
they
everything
acquired
we
their
need,
intelligence
Helen
and
replied,
capabilities.
gesturing into the empty
The
training
systematic
ground.
efficiency
Space
with which Admiral
students
Thompson
and
was handling
purpose.
the crisis.
You'll need equipment,
impressed everyone in the
facilities,
shelter.
support
She
staff.
wasn't just defending
I need
Pearl
darkness,
Harbor.
silence,
She was
and
ensuring that
trust.
the attack would
Everything
provide
else is
intelligence about
luxury.
who had compromised
General
her
Thompson
classified
stepped forward.
technologies
The
and
president
how they'd
wants to
done it.
meet you.
There's
Admiral,
talk of a ceremony,
Johnson said.
public recognition.
Ma'am, you're planning for
Then
this
the
type of
president
situation
misunderstands
was
what we're building
comprehensive.
here.
Helen
Petty
said
Officer
calmly.
Johnson,
Ghosts
when you spend
don't get
30 years
ceremonies.
developing
They don't get
defensive
recognition.
systems for critical
They get
military
results.
installations,
The public should
you learn
know
to
that
plan
heroes
for
like you
every
exist.
conceivable threat.
The public should sleep
including
soundly,
the threat
not
of your
knowing
own
we
technologies
exist.
being used
That's
against
the whole
you.
point.
It was a
Before
sobering
the generals
reminder
could
that Admiral
respond,
Thompson's
an alarm
strategic
sounded
thinking
across the base.
had extended
Not
far
the standard
beyond
drill
conventional
alarm,
military
but the one
planning.
reserved for actual
She'd
threats.
anticipated betrayal,
Colonel Richards'
technology
radio
crackled
theft,
to life,
and
sophisticated
we have a
insider
breach.
attacks
North
decades
perimeter.
before they became
Single
realistic
individual.
concerns.
Avoided all
The
sensors
radio
until
brought
the final
continuing
fence.
updates
He's
as Pearl Harbor's
Sir,
defenders
he's
implemented
asking for
Admiral
Phantom
Thompson's
6 by
protocols and
Helen
systematically
systematically didn't
neutralized
change.
the remaining
Dimitri's
threats.
early.
The
He
ground
said
forces were
13
being
days.
contained and captured.
You know who this
the
is?
electronic
Anderson
warfare
demanded.
assault had been
Dmitry
eliminated,
Volkov,
and the base
former
was returning to
Spetsnaz
normal
Alpha Group,
operational
the
status.
Soviet Union's best
Admiral
tracker.
Thompson, he's
Commander
been hunting
Davis
me
reported.
since 1991.
All hostile forces have been
Helen
secured.
turned to her students.
Base infrastructure
Lesson 2
is
about
returning
to
to
begin.
normal operations.
Should we call security?
Ma'am, your
Torres
protocols
asked.
worked exactly
No,
as designed.
let him come.
Commander,
My
those
students need to see
protocols
what
were
they're
designed
trained
by
to
people
become.
who understood
10 minutes
that
later,
America's
a
enemies
figure
would
emerged from the
eventually
morning
develop
fog.
the capability
Dmitry
to turn our
Volkov was
strengths
73
against
years
us.
old.
Today
but moved like a
proved
man
that
half
day
that
has
age.
arrived.
Tall,
As the
scarred,
immediate crisis
with eyes that
subsided,
missed nothing.
attention
He
in the
stopped
shelter
20
turned
meters
to
from
questions
Helen,
about what
hands
had happened
visible
and
but
why.
ready.
The tourists
Hello,
who had been
little
caught in the
ghost,
middle of a
he said in
military
accented
assault
English.
were naturally
Hello,
curious
old
about the
wolf,
extraordinary
Helen
woman
replied.
who had led
You're
their
early.
protection and defense.
I was in the neighborhood.
Admiral,
Thought
one of
I'd
the
see this
elderly
academy
veterans
I'm
among the
hearing
tourists
about.
asked.
His eyes
Ma'am,
swept over the
how
7
did you know
Marines.
this attack was coming?
These are your students?
Admiral Thompson
Children playing
considered her
soldier
response carefully.
Jake started to
I didn't
step
know
forward,
a specific
but
attack
Helen's
was
hand
planned for
stopped him
today,
without even
but
looking.
I've been
They're
monitoring
not
electronic
playing.
anomalies
They're
around
learning.
Pacific Fleet
Learning what?
installations
To hide
for
in
several
shadows?
months.
To kill from
the
darkness?
pattern suggested that someone
To
was
protect those who
systematically
cannot
gathering
protect
intelligence
themselves.
about our defensive
Dmitry
capabilities.
laughed,
But there was no
Ma'am,
humor in it.
Chief Williams
Protection.
added,
That's
is
why
that
you
what
were
you call what
conducting
happened in
security
Bosnia?
assessments.
43
Exactly,
men dead
Chief.
in one night.
Someone needed to
43
verify
child
that our
traffickers
improvements were
eliminated,
working as
Helen
designed
corrected.
and identify
Would you
any
prefer I had let them
vulnerabilities that
continue?
might be exploited.
I would prefer you
Johnson
had followed
studied
orders
Admiral
and
Thompson's
extracted without
expression,
engaging.
sensing there was
Whose
more
orders,
to the story
Dmitry?
than she was
The
revealing.
ones that came from officials
Admiral,
profiting from
do
the
you
trade,
have suspicions
or the
about who
ones
might
written
have
on the
provided
faces
the
of
attackers with
317
classified
children waiting to
information?
be sold?
I have
The two
suspicions,
circled each
Petty
other
Officer.
slowly, not
But
aggressively,
accusations
but like
require
old
evidence,
predators
and
recognizing
evidence requires
territory.
investigation.
The gathered Marines watched
Before
in
Johnson
fascination
could ask
as
follow-up
two
questions,
legends sized
the radio
each other up.
crackled with a new
You know why I'm
transmission
here,
that would change
Dmitry
everything.
said.
Admiral
Hydra
Thompson
sent
this
you?
is Captain Morrison at
Hydra
base
pays me.
operations.
There's a difference.
Ma'am, we've
not
recovered
much of
materials
one.
from the
Dmitry
hostile
shrugged.
forces that
A man must
Admiral,
eat.
even
I think
old
you need to
wolves
see
need
this
sustenance.
personally. What kind
And
of
if I
materials,
said the
Captain?
Academy could use
Ma'am,
someone with
they
your
were carrying
skills,
detailed technical
I would say you're trying to
specifications
turn
for
me, little
systems that
ghost.
appear to match
It
your
won't work.
classified protocols.
I'm not
exactly.
trying to turn you.
Someone
I'm
provided
offering
them
you
with
what Hydra
blueprints
never
for Pearl
could.
Harbor's most
A chance to
sensitive
matter
defensive
again.
technologies.
To teach instead of
The
hunt.
confirmation
to
that
build
Admiral
instead of
Thompson's
destroy.
worst fears were justified.
Pretty
sent
words,
a chill
but
through
we both
everyone
know
in the
how this
shelter.
ends.
This hadn't been a random
Yes,
attack
Helen
or even
agreed.
sophisticated
But not
intelligence
today.
gathering. Someone
Today,
with access
you're
to
going
the
to help me highest levels
these
of
Marines a
classified
lesson about
information
tracking.
had deliberately provided
Dmitri
enemies
raised
with
an
the
eyebrow.
tools needed to assault
You want me to
Pearl
train
Harbor.
your students?
Captain Morrison,
I want you to
Admiral
hunt them.
Thompson
Dude,
said, her
7
voice
Marines,
carrying new steel,
30 minutes head
secure
start,
all recovered
anywhere on
materials
base.
and
If
prepare
even
them for
one evades
detailed
you for 3
analysis.
hours,
I'll
you
be
walk
conducting
away,
the
and
investigation
Hydra never
personally.
hears from you again.
Admiral, with respect,
And when I catch
you're
them
retired
all,
from active duty.
then we settle
This
our business.
investigation will
Dmitri
require
considered
Captain
this.
Morrison.
Agreed,
Admiral Thompson
but I choose the
interrupted.
conditions.
Someone used my
Name
life's
them.
work to attack
They can
Pearl
use
Harbor
any
and
resources on
endanger the
base
lives
except
of
vehicles
American
or
military
outside
personnel.
help. I track
and
old
civilians.
school. No technology.
I designed the
just
systems
skill.
they compromised.
Helen looked at her
I
7
created the
students.
protocols
Their
they
faces showed
attempted to
fear,
defeat,
but also determination.
and I'm the person most
You heard
qualified
him.
to determine
30 minutes
exactly
head start,
how they acquired
beginning
that
now.
information. The 7
Yes,
Marines
ma'am.
scattered immediately.
Admiral,
each
we'll have
heading in
everything
different
ready for your
directions.
review.
Jake went north
Admiral
toward the
Thompson
motor pool.
turned away from
Maria
the
headed
radio
for the barracks
and faced the
complex.
group of people who
Derek
had shared the
disappeared
morning's
into the
crisis with
administrative
her.
buildings.
Tourists who had
The
come
others
to honor
split up,
history,
using what they'd learned
security
about the base
personnel
over their
who had done
years
their
of
jobs
service.
according to training,
Dimitri watched them
and
go
military
with professional
veterans who
interest.
understood
The
the
technical
gravity
one will
of
try
what
to
had
use
just
security
occurred.
cameras to track
Ladies
me.
and gentlemen,
The woman will
she
blend
said,
with others in her
addressing the
barracks.
entire shelter.
The angry one,
What happened here
Morrison,
today was an attack
he'll try
not
to
just
think
on
like his
Pearl Harbor,
grandfather,
but on the principles
Maybe,
that military
Helen said,
installations
or maybe
exist
they'll
to
surprise
defend.
us both.
Someone
Children
with
don't
access to
surprise
our
me
most
anymore.
sensitive information
These aren't children.
attempted to use
They're
that
Marines
knowledge
who
to
faced
harm
death
American
last night
personnel
and showed up to train
and
this
compromise
morning.
our
That
national
makes them
security.
extraordinary.
The tourists listened
For the next
intently,
30 minutes,
understanding
Helen
that
and
they had
Dimitri
witnessed
stood
something
in
far
comfortable
more
silence,
significant
while the
than a simple
generals and gathered
security
Marines
incident.
watched
They had been
nervously.
present during a
This
sophisticated
wasn't what anyone
military
had expected
assault
from the first
and had
day of the
seen
Ghost
American
Protocol
defenders
Academy.
successfully
At exactly
repel that attack.
0800,
Using
Dimitri
systems
began
and
to
protocols
He
that
didn't
most
run
people
or
didn't
hurry.
even know
He
existed.
simply walked to where Derek
Admiral,
had disappeared.
one of the women
and
among
knelt,
the tourists,
examining
said,
the ground.
"We want to thank you
His
for
fingers
keeping us
traced
safe.
patterns only
Ma'am,
he could see.
keeping you safe
Technical
was the
specialists tried to
responsibility
double
of
back
every
3
person in
times
this
to
shelter.
confuse his trail.
Petty Officer Johnson,
Smart, but he
Sergeant
steps heavier
Rodriguez,
on his right
Chief
foot when he's
Williams,
thinking,
and all
makes
the other
pattern
personnel who
distinctive.
responded to this
He followed
crisis
Derek's
are
trail
the
with
real
uncanny
heroes of today's
precision,
events.
moving through the
It was a
administrative
gracious
building,
deflection,
like he'd
but
lived
everyone
there for
present
years.
understood that
Within
Admiral
40
Thompson's
minutes,
knowledge
he found
and
Derek
leadership
hidden in a
had been
server
crucial
room,
to their
tucked behind
survival
equipment.
and the
First
successful
catch,
defense of
Dimitri
Pearl Harbor.
announced over the radio.
Commander Davis
Helen had
uses an
given him
encrypted
6 to
communication
go.
device,
Derek
digital
emerged,
signature
frustrated but
verification,
curious.
to coordinate
How?
the final security
You think
sweep
too much,
and
Dimitri
provide
told him,
Admiral Thompson
thinking
with
leaves
detailed
patterns.
reports on the
Next time,
investigation findings.
trust instinct.
Admiral Thompson,
The next 2 hours
Rodriguez
were a
said,
masterclass
approaching
in
her as
tracking.
the civilians
Dimitri
began
found
preparing
4
to leave
more
the shelter
Marines
with
with
methodical
methodical
efficiency.
I want to apologize
Each
again
time
for
he
my
explained
behavior
exactly
this morning.
how.
Admiral
A disturbed
Thompson
spider
studied
web
the young
appeared,
sergeant's
a partial
face,
footprint
seeing
there,
genuine
the way
remorse
dust had
and
been
professional
displaced on a
growth.
windowsill. Sergeant
But 2
Rodriguez
remained hidden.
This morning
Jake
you
and
encountered
Maria.
something outside your training and
Interesting.
experience.
Dimitri admitted
You
as
followed
the 3rd hour
protocols,
approached.
asked appropriate
The bullies are
questions,
proving most
and
capable.
maintained
Former
security
bullies,
vigilance.
Helen corrected.
Those are exactly
People
the
can
qualities we
change,
need in our
not in
security
one night.
personnel.
No,
but ma'am,
but
I
they
was
can choose to
disrespectful
change in
and
one moment.
Sergeant,
The rest is
respect
just
is earned
followed
through
through.
competence and
With
character,
10 minutes remaining,
not through
Dimitri
recognition
stood
of
in the
rank
center
or
of the
authority.
base.
Eyes
This
closed,
morning,
you
listening.
demonstrated both
Then he
competence
smiled.
and
The
character.
woman is in the
when
mess
it
hall,
mattered most.
hiding where this all
Rodriguez
began.
felt a weight
Poetic,
lift from his
but
shoulders.
predictable.
Admiral
He found
Thompson's
Maria in the
forgiveness was
walk-in
generous,
freezer,
where Helen
but
had hidden them
more
the night
importantly,
before.
her
She
assessment
emerged
of his
shivering,
performance
but
gave
proud
him
to have
confidence
lasted
that
so long.
he could learn from the
5 minutes
experience
left
and become
Helen
a better
announced.
security
One
professional.
Marine still hidden.
Chief Williams approached
Dimitri's
him,
expression,
his expression
grew serious.
thoughtful.
This was
Admiral,
professional
if
pride
I may
now.
ask,
What
he
happens
moved with
next?
renewed purpose, checking
Chief,
every
what
place
happens
a person
next
could
is a
hide.
thorough
3
investigation
minutes,
into how
2 minutes,
classified
1
technologies
minute.
were compromised
The alarm
and
sounded.
who provided
Jake
them to
Morrison
hostile
had evaded
forces.
the greatest
That
tracker in
investigation
Russian
will
history.
determine whether this was an
Impossible,
isolated incident
Dimitri
or
muttered.
part of a larger
Then
threat
louder,
to Pacific
"Show
Fleet
yourself,
security."
Morrison.
And the protocols
Jake
you
emerged
activated
from the
today,
last place anyone
those
would
protocols
look.
will be
He'd been
evaluated,
standing in plain sight among the Marines
and
watching
integrated
the
into
exercise.
standard defensive
Having grabbed a
procedures.
different uniform
The
and
attack
blended
proved
with the
they
crowd.
work as designed.
He'd been there
but it
for
also
2
revealed
hours,
improvements
hiding in
that
plain
need to be
view.
made.
His
Johnson
grandfather's
joined their
trick,
conversation,
Helen said
still
quietly.
processing the
Tim
remarkable
always said the
events of
best
the
hiding
morning.
place was
Admiral,
where everyone could see
will you be returning
but no
to
one
active
would look.
duty to conduct the investigation?
Dimitri stared at Jake with
Admiral
something
Thompson
approaching
smiled.
respect.
The expression
You didn't
combining
run.
professional
You didn't hide.
determination
You became
with personal
background.
satisfaction.
Instructor
Petty
Carter
Officer
taught us this
Johnson,
morning.
I've
We're
been
always
conducting
being
this
watched.
investigation for
So,
months.
I figured why fight
Today's
it?
attack
Just
provided
become
the
someone
evidence
not
I
worth
needed
watching.
to identify
Dimitri
the
turned
scope
to
of the
Helen.
threat,
One
and the
evaded me.
effectiveness of our
By our
responses.
agreement,
I walk
Ma'am,
away.
you were
Or
investigating
you
this
stay and
before it
teach,
happened?
Helen offered.
I was investigating
Hydra will never
anomalies
pay
that
you what you're
suggested
worth.
someone was
But
gathering
here,
intelligence
you could
about
matter.
Pacific Fleet
Here,
defensive capabilities.
You could create legends.
Today's
instead of
attack
hunting
confirmed
them.
my suspicions.
I've
and
killed
provided
67
crucial evidence
people
about
in my
how that
career.
intelligence was being
And
used.
I've killed 73.
The revelation that
our
Admiral
students
Thompson
don't
had
need to
been
repeat our
conducting a
numbers.
covert investigation.
They need to learn our
added
skills
another
to
layer
prevent
to the
those
morning's
numbers.
extraordinary
Dimitri was
events.
quiet for a long
She
moment.
hadn't been at Pearl
Then he
Harbor
pulled out
by
a satellite
coincidence.
phone and dialed
She'd been
a
there
number.
as part
He
of a
spoke
deliberate
rapid
effort
Russian,
to uncover
then switched to
security
English
threats
for Helen's
and test
benefit.
defensive
This is
capabilities.
Volkov.
As the
Contract
last of the
terminated.
emergency protocols
Phantom
were
6 is dead,
deactivated,
and
has
Pearl
been for
Harbor
15
returned to
years.
normal operations.
Some janitor is playing
the group in
soldier
the
with
shelter
children,
prepared to
not
transition
worth
back
my
to
time.
civilian status.
He hung up
The tourists
and tossed
would
the
be
phone
debriefed.
into a nearby
The security
trash can.
personnel would
I
file
assume
detailed
instructor
reports,
positions come
and
with
Admiral
room and
Thompson would
board.
begin the
Helen
complex
smiled.
process of
Welcome to
analyzing
Ghost
the
Protocol
intelligence
Academy,
recovered from the
Instructor
attack.
Volkov.
Admiral,
The gathered
one of
Marines
the elderly
erupted in
veterans
surprise
among
and
the tourists,
confusion.
said,
General
"Ma'am,
Anderson
we'll
stepped
never
forward.
forget what you
We
did for
can't
us
just
today."
hire a Russian operative
Sir,
Former
What I did
Russian
today was my
operative,
duty as a naval
Dmitry
officer
corrected.
and as an
I
American.
defected the moment
The
I
same
threw that
duty
phone
that brought
away.
you to Pearl Harbor.
Besides,
to
you
honor
need me.
those who served before
How many of your
us.
instructors have
It was a
successfully
reminder that
tracked
the morning's
targets through
events were
Siberia,
part of a larger
winters, and
continuum
Chechen
of
mountains?
service and sacrifice.
This is highly irregular.
The veterans who had
General
come to
Thompson
remember Pearl
protested.
Harbor's history.
So, as
had
a
witnessed
janitor
new
who's
chapter
really a
being
special
written
operations
in the ongoing
legend,
defense of
Helen pointed
American
out,
values
the
and
academy
security.
isn't about
Ladies and
regular.
gentlemen,
It's
Admiral
about
Thompson
effective.
announced to the entire
Over the
group,
next week,
you'll be
word
escorted
spread
back to the
throughout the
visitor
military
center where
community.
you'll meet with
Ghost
base
Protocol
personnel
Academy
to
was
complete your
real,
visit.
and it was
I want to
unlike
thank each of
anything
you
that
for
had
your
existed
cooperation
before.
and
No
courage
high-tech
during a very
facilities,
difficult
no
situation.
elaborate equipment.
As the tourists prepared
Just
to
two
leave the
aging
shelter,
warriors
Admiral
teaching young
Thompson
Marines
pulled
to
Johnson
navigate
aside
darkness,
for a private
both
conversation.
literal and metaphorical.
Petty Officer Johnson,
The first
she
official
said,
class started
you
with 28
demonstrated
volunteers
exceptional
from all
leadership
service
and
branches.
judgment this
Helen's
morning.
original 7
Your
became
willingness
squad
to trust
leaders,
civilian
having
expertise
learned
and
more in
adapt
one
to
night of
changing
terror
circumstances
than most
probably
learned in
saved
years of
lives.
training.
Jake
Admiral,
Morrison
I was
proved
just
especially
following your
adept.
guidance.
His natural
No,
athleticism
petty officer.
combined with his
You made
grandfather's
independent decisions
genetic
to
gifts
trust
for night vision,
unfamiliar information
making him
and
exceptional
implement
in
irregular
darkness
procedures.
operations. Those decisions required
more
professional
importantly,
courage
his
and good
transformation
judgment.
from bully to
Johnson
protector
felt a surge of
became the
pride
model
at her
for
assessment.
others.
Admiral
He
Thompson's
spent extra
approval
hours
meant
training
more than
newer
routine
students,
commendations
especially
from
those who
superior
reminded him
officers
of who
because
he
it
used to
came
be.
from someone who had
Maria
demonstrated
Santos
extraordinary
discovered she had an
competence
uncanny
under the
ability
most
for
challenging
sound recognition.
circumstances. Able to
Ma'am,
identify
Johnson
individuals
said,
by breathing
what you
patterns and
accomplished today
heartbeats
was
from
remarkable.
distances.
You saved Pearl
She developed
Harbor.
a training module
Admiral
called
Thompson
acoustic
shook her head
signature
slightly.
recognition.
Petty Officer
that would
Johnson,
become standard
Pearl
in special
Harbor was saved
operations
by the
training
same thing that
worldwide.
has always
Derek
saved
Chen
it.
created a
Dedicated
hybrid
personnel
approach,
doing their
combining
jobs
traditional
with
tracking
skill and
with
courage.
modern technology.
I just provided some
in ways that
technical
enhanced
assistance.
rather than replaced human skills.
As the formal debriefing
his innovations
process
would eventually
began,
revolutionize
and normal
surveillance
operations resumed
countermeasures
throughout Pearl
but
Harbor.
it was Helen herself
Chief Williams
who
found
proved most
himself
reflecting
transformative.
on the morning's
Her teaching
events
method
and
was
their
unorthodox.
larger significance.
Instead of breaking
He had
students
served
down,
under Admiral
she built them
Thompson
up from
years
their
earlier,
failures.
without fully
Every
understanding
mistake
the
became a
scope
lesson.
of her
Every
contributions to
weakness
naval
a potential
defense.
strength.
Today had provided
You
a
don't
glimpse
create
of the
warriors by
strategic
destroying
thinking and
people,
operational
he told
planning
General Anderson
that had
during
shaped
one of his
Pacific
observation
capabilities
visits.
for decades.
You create them by showing
Chief,
them they're
Admiral
capable
Thompson
of more
said,
than they
approaching
imagined.
him as the shelter
3 weeks
area
into the
was
academy's
being secured.
operation,
It
an
was good to
unexpected
serve with you
visitor
again,
arrived.
even under
Anna
these
Volkov,
circumstances.
now Anna Patterson,
Admiral
drove
the
onto
honor was
base
mine.
with her 17-year-old
Ma'am,
daughter
if
Helena.
I may ask, will
The
you
girl
be
was
returning
tall,
to active
athletic,
duty?
with her
Admiral
mother's sharp
Thompson
features
considered the
and
question
determined eyes.
while watching the systematic
true?
cleanup
Anna
and
asked Helen
investigation
directly.
activities taking
Uncle
place
Dmitry
around
is
them.
teaching here?
Chief, I
is,
never really
Helen
left active
confirmed.
duty.
Does
I
that
just
bother
shifted
you?
from official
He hunted you
responsibilities
for 30
to
years.
unofficial ones.
You saved my life.
Ma'am, the irony
Protecting
is
American naval
substantial.
installations and
Young
personnel
Helena
isn't
stepped
something you
forward.
retire from.
I want to
Chief.
apply for the
The methods
academy,
change,
but
Helen
the mission
studied her
continues.
carefully.
It was a
You're too
philosophy
young.
that explained
Minimum
Admiral
age is
Thompson's
18.
presence at Pearl Harbor.
You were 17
and her
when you joined
extensive
the military,
preparations for threats that
Helena
others
countered.
hadn't anticipated.
Lied about your age to get
She
in
had spent
early.
her retirement
How do you know
years
that?
continuing to serve,
Mom kept
but in
newspaper
ways that weren't
clippings.
reflected in
Every
official
mention of
records
Phantom 6,
or
every
organizational
rumor,
charts.
every
The
speculation.
radio crackled with final
I've been
status
studying you my
reports as
entire
Pearl
life,
Harbor completed
studying
its
and
return
doing
to
her
normal
different things.
operations.
Then let me do.
All stations,
Helen
this
looked
is
at Anna,
base
who
operations.
She's
Security
been training since she
condition
could
normal
walk.
has been
Dmitry
restored.
may have hunted you,
All hostile
but he also
forces
taught
have
his
been
niece's
secured.
daughter everything
Damage
he knew about
assessment teams
survival.
are conducting
Not
evaluations.
everything, Dmitry
Outstanding
said,
work by
appearing
all
from
personnel,
nowhere,
as was his habit.
Admiral
But enough
Thompson
to make her
keyed the radio
interesting.
one final time.
The reunion between
Base
Dmitry
operations,
and Anna was
this is
touching in
Admiral
its
Thompson.
simplicity.
Recommend
The old
implementation
tracker
of
hugged his
lessons
great
learned
niece with
briefings
genuine
for all
affection,
personnel
then
within
turned to
72
Helena with a
hours.
professional assessment.
Today's events provide
Show me
valuable
what you
intelligence
remember,
about
he said.
evolving threats.
For the next
and
hour,
successful
Helena
defensive
demonstrated
responses.
skills that put some of the
Copy,
Marine
Admiral.
students to shame.
Ma'am, will you
Tracking,
be available to
evasion,
conduct those briefings?
acoustic targeting,
Affirmative.
even
base
basic pressure
operations.
point techniques.
I'll be remaining
when
at
she
Pearl
finished,
Harbor to
both Helen and
complete the
Dmitry were
investigation
impressed
and ensure
3
all
months,
protocols
Helen
are
decided.
properly
You trained with the
documented.
Marines for 3
As
months.
Admiral Thompson
if you keep
concluded
up,
her
you
official
can enter the academy on your 18th
She turned to
birthday.
address the small
Helena's
group of
face
people
lit up.
who had shared the
I won't
morning's crisis
disappoint
with
you.
her. Johnson,
It's not about disappointing
Rodriguez,
me.
Chief
It's about
Williams,
honoring
honoring those
and
who
the
came
few
before.
remaining tourists
Your
who were
mother
completing
survived
their
hell.
debriefing process.
Make sure her sacrifice means
Ladies and
something.
gentlemen, she said,
as the weeks turned
what
into
happened
months,
here today
the Ghost
demonstrates
Protocol
both
Academy
the threats
evolved
we
from an
face
experiment
and the
into an
capabilities we
institution.
have to meet those
The Pentagon
threats.
quietly
The attack
funded
was
expansions,
sophisticated and
though
dangerous,
Helen
but it
insisted
was
on
defeated
maintaining
by
the
well-trained
minimalist approach.
personnel following
No
established
fancy buildings
procedures
or
and adapting
high-tech
to unexpected
simulators,
circumstances.
just practical training in
Admiral
real-world conditions.
Rodriguez said,
The
"Ma'am,
accident happened
what should
during
we learn
week
from
12.
this experience?
A night training exercise
Sergeant Rodriguez,
went wrong.
the
when a
primary
sudden
lesson
storm
is that
hit Camp
security
Pendleton.
threats are
Zero
constantly
visibility
evolving,
and
60
our
knot
response
winds,
capabilities must
horizontal
evolve
rain.
as well. The
Two
technologies
students,
and
Roberts
tactics
and
used
Kim,
in today's
were
attack
separated
didn't
from their
exist
unit
10
in the
years
mountains
ago,
east of
but the
base.
fundamental
Radio
principles of
communications
military
were down.
defense remain
Standard
unchanged.
search and rescue couldn't
Ma'am,
operate in
those
the
principles
conditions.
being Helen suited
vigilance,
up without
competence,
hesitation.
adaptability,
At 58,
and
she
courage.
shouldn't have been able to
The
do
same
what came
qualities
next.
that have defended
But
Pearl Harbor
muscle
for
memory
more than
doesn't
80
age the same way
years.
muscles do.
Johnson nodded.
She disappeared
Understanding
into the
that
storm
Admiral
with only
Thompson was
basic
player
gear
and
and
an
morning's
old-fashioned
events in the
compass.
larger context
Jake
of Pearl
insisted on
Harbor's
going
history
with her.
and mission.
You trained us for this,
Admiral,
he argued.
how do we prepare
Let
for
us help.
threats we can't
This isn't
anticipate?
training, Morrison.
Petty
This is
Officer
real.
Johnson, you
That's
prepare
why
by
you need
maintaining
backup.
the highest
My grandfather
standards of
wouldn't let
training
you go
and
alone.
professionalism.
Helen studied
by
him for a
questioning
moment, then
anomalies
nodded.
and investigating
Gear up.
suspicious
We leave in 2
circumstances.
minutes.
And
They
by
went into the
remembering
storm
that
together.
the defense of
Teacher
freedom
and student,
requires
legend
constant
and
vigilance
legacy.
from every person.
The wind
in
was so
uniform.
strong it could knock a person
As the
off
group
their
began
feet.
to disperse,
The rain so
each
heavy
person
it was like
carrying
walking
memories
through
of
a
an
waterfall.
extraordinary day,
But
and
Helen
lessons
moved
that would
through it like
influence
she was
their
born
future
to it.
service. And Jake
Admiral
followed,
Thompson
trusting
prepared
her
her
the
completely.
detailed investigation.
They found
that would
Roberts
occupy
first,
her attention for
hypothermic
the coming
and
disoriented.
The
Sheltering
attack on
in a
Pearl
shallow
Harbor
cave.
had been defeated.
Helen
But
immediately
the larger
began
questions
medical
about
treatment,
how
while
classified
Jake went after
technologies
Kim,
had been
using the
compromised
search
and
pattern
who had
Helen had
provided
taught
them
him.
to hostile
He
forces.
found her 20
remained
minutes
to be
later,
answered.
injured
Those
but
answers would
alive.
determine
Her
whether
ankle broken
today's
from a
events
fall.
were an
The
isolated
journey back
incident
took
or
4 hours.
the beginning of a larger
4
campaign
hours of
against
carrying
American
injured
naval
Marines through a
installations.
storm that would have killed
Admiral,
most people.
Chief Williams
But Helen
said as
and
he
Jake
prepared to
brought them
return to
home
his duties.
alive.
Ma'am,
Colonel
it's
Richards
been an
met them
honor
at the
to
base
serve with
medical
you
center.
again. That was
Chief
insane.
Williams,
The
heroic
honor has been
but
mine.
insane.
Your
Helen was
professionalism
exhausted
and
but
dedication
unbowed.
represent
It was
the best
necessary.
traditions of naval
We don't
service.
leave people behind.
As Chief
You could have
Williams
died
walked
out
away,
there,
but
Admiral
we didn't.
Thompson found
and now
herself
every
alone
student
for
at the
the first
academy
time
knows
since the
that
crisis
we practice
began.
what we preach.
The shelter
That
was
changes
secure.
everything.
The base had
She was
returned to
right.
normal operations.
After that night,
and the immediate
Academy's
threats had been
reputation
neutralized.
solidified.
But her work was
These
far
weren't just
from
instructors
finished.
teaching
She
theory.
retrieved the
They were
surveillance device
practitioners
that
who
had
would
started
risk
the morning's
everything for their
confrontation.
students.
The
6
equipment
months into
that
the
had detected
Academy's
the electronic
operation,
anomalies
the real
preceding
test
the
came.
attack.
A Hydra
The
cell
device
had
attempted
performed
to
exactly
infiltrate
as
Camp
designed,
Pendleton,
providing
targeting
early
the
warning
academy
of a sophisticated assault
12
on Pearl
operatives,
Harbor's
highly
defensive
trained.
systems.
Using the
Looking
cover
at the
of a
worn
congressional
metal housing
inspection
and
modified
modified
components,
They didn't expect the
Admiral
janitors,
Thompson reflected on the
groundskeepers, and
path
food
that had
service
brought her to
workers
this moment.
be academy graduates
30 years
placed
of active
specifically
duty
to
developing
watch for such
defensive
technologies,
The
followed by
attack
years
came
of
at 0
retirement
to
spent
300
monitoring
hours.
those same
Or it would
technologies
have,
to ensure
if
they
Helen
remained
hadn't already
effective
positioned
and
her
secure.
students.
The
The radio
radio
interrupted
walked
her
into a
thoughts.
trap they couldn't
Admiral
see coming.
Thompson,
Every
this is
shadow
Commander
held a
Davis.
ghost.
Every
Ma'am,
corner
we've
concealed
completed
a
the
protector.
preliminary
The
analysis.
takedown
of
was
materials
swift,
recovered
silent,
from the hostile
and
forces.
complete.
No
The
shots
intelligence
fired,
they possessed
no alarms
is
raised.
comprehensive.
12 Hydra operatives
Commander,
captured
I'll be
without
right
a
there.
single casualty
Admiral
on either
Thompson
side.
secured her
How?
equipment. The Hydra
and prepared
leader
to
demanded
transition
as he
from
was processed.
crisis response to
We had
detailed
perfect
investigation.
intelligence. We knew
The most
your
challenging
patterns,
part of
your
the day's
weaknesses.
work was about to
Helen
begin,
smiled coldly.
determining exactly
You had
how
intelligence
enemies
on
had
Phantom
acquired
6,
classified
but I'm not
information
her anymore.
about
I'm
Pearl
something
Harbor's
better.
most
I'm a
sensitive
teacher,
defensive
and
capabilities.
I've taught 318
As she walked
students
through
so
the
far.
corridors of Pearl Harbor,
Each one is
toward
now
the
a
intelligence
ghost.
analysis
Each one is
center,
watching.
Admiral
Good luck
Thompson
finding them
passed
all.
groups of personnel
The Hydra
who were
network
discussing
began
the
to
morning's
collapse
events.
after that.
Young
Not through
sailors,
military
experienced
action,
petty
but through
officers,
paranoia.
and
They
senior
couldn't trust
chiefs
anyone.
were all
Couldn't
processing
predict
their
where the next
experiences
ghost might
and
be
understanding
hiding.
how
The
close
janitor
they had
might
come
be an
to
academy
a catastrophic
graduate.
security
The secretary,
breach.
the mechanic,
Admiral,
the
Commander
cook,
Davis greeted
anyone
her as she
could be a
entered the
ghost.
analysis center.
General
The
Anderson
materials we
visited the
recovered
academy on its
include
first
detailed
anniversary.
technical
The
specifications
28 original
for systems
students
that
had
exactly
become
match her
200.
classified protocols.
The program had expanded to 3
Show
other
me,
bases,
Commander.
all following
Davis led her
Helen's
to a
minimalist
secure
model.
examination table
You've
where
revolutionized
documents,
special
electronic
operations
devices,
training,
he told
and other
Helen.
materials.
The president
have been
wants to
carefully
award you
arranged.
the Medal of Freedom.
Admiral Thompson
I
studied
already
the
have all the
evidence with
medals
the
I
trained
need,
eye
Helen
of someone who
replied.
had created
Give
the
it to
very
Jake Morrison,
systems
the
the
attackers
the
had
future of
attempted
the
to
program.
exploit. Morrison,
Commander, these
the Marine who
specifications are
shoved you,
more than
the
stolen
Marine who learned
information.
from his mistakes.
They include
The Marine
modifications
who went into
and
a storm to
improvements
save
that
others.
suggest ongoing
The Marine
technical
who was
development.
becoming the instructor.
Ma'am, what does
his
that mean?
grandfather would be proud
It means
of.
whoever provided
Jake had
this
indeed
intelligence to the
flourished.
attackers
His natural
wasn't just
leadership,
sharing
tempered by
existing
humility,
information.
learned through failure.
They were actively
made him
working
an
to
ideal
enhance the
instructor
effectiveness
candidate.
of the stolen
He was scheduled to take over the
technologies.
East Coast
The
Academy when it
implications were
opened.
chilling.
Maria
Admiral
Santos
Thompson
had been
was
looking
looking
at
at
evidence
naval
of systematic
intelligence.
technology
Her acoustic linguistic skills
that went
invaluable
far
for
beyond
submarine
simple
detection
espionage.
and underwater
Someone with
surveillance.
access to her
But she
classified
returned to
work
teach monthly
had been
workshops,
collaborating with
never
hostile
forgetting
forces
where her
to
transformation
improve their
began.
capabilities.
Derek
and
Chen had
increase the
developed an
effectiveness
entirely
of their
new field of
attacks.
study. Commander
Integrated
Davis,
tactical
I need
analysis,
complete access to all
combining
recovered
human
materials
intuition
and
with
full
technological
authority to conduct
capability.
whatever investigation
The NSA
is
had tried to
necessary
recruit
to
him
identify the
repeatedly,
source of
but he
this
chose to
intelligence
stay at the
breach.
academy.
Admiral,
Dmitry
you will have
Volkov
whatever you
had
need.
become something
As
no one
Admiral
expected.
Thompson began the
Beloved.
detailed process
His
of
gruff
analyzing
exterior
the
hid a
evidence
genuine
and tracing
care
the
for his
origins of the
students.
compromised
His tracking
technologies.
classes were legendary.
She reflected
but it
on
was
the
his
morning's
life
events
lessons
and
that
their
students
larger
remembered
significance.
most.
Every
Pearl Harbor
choice
had
leaves
been
a trail
attacked,
using
he
her
would
own
say.
defensive innovations.
Make sure yours leads
but it had
somewhere
also
worth
been
going.
successfully defended.
Young Helena
using
Patterson had
systems
not
and
only met
protocols she had
expectations,
created
but
for
exceeded
exactly
them.
that purpose.
On her 18th birthday,
the attack had
she
failed.
formally entered the
attackers
academy
had been
and completed
captured,
the course
and
in record
crucial
time.
intelligence had
She would
been
eventually
recovered.
become the
But the
youngest
investigation
instructor in
that lay
academy
ahead
history,
would determine whether
specializing
American
in what she
naval
called
installations remained
inherited
secure,
instinct,
or
teaching
faced an
students to
ongoing
recognize and
campaign of
develop genetic
technologically sophisticated
predispositions
assaults for certain skills.
Looking out the window of
the
the
second
analysis
anniversary
center
of the
toward
Academy
Pearl Harbor's
brought an
historic
unexpected
memorial.
guest.
Admiral
The president
Thompson
himself
understood
arrived,
that she was
not
writing
with
a
fanfare,
new
but
chapter
quietly,
in the base's long
wanting to
history
observe
of defending
without
American
disrupting
freedom
training and
He watched
security.
Helen lead a night
The
navigation
enemies had
exercise.
changed,
The
technologies
technologies
had
had
evolved,
evolved,
but
but the fundamental mission
techniques
remained the same.
and Jake Morrison
Admiral
teach close
Thompson
quarters
stood at
combat
attention
with a
as the
patience his
American
younger
flag
self
was lowered
could never
during
have
evening
managed.
colors.
The ceremony
This is not what I
observed by
expected,
personnel
the
throughout
president
Pearl
admitted to
Harbor,
Helen,
who had
I thought it would
participated
be
in the
more
day's successful
military.
defense.
In
It
the
is
red glow of
military,
sunset,
Helen
the
replied.
flag represented
Just not
the
the kind
values
you're
and
used to.
principles that
We're not creating
military
super
installations
soldiers.
exist to
We're
protect.
creating super
Behind her,
humans.
the
People
investigation
who can fight if
continued as
needed,
analysts
but
worked
choose
through
protection
the night
over
to
aggression,
understand the full
wisdom
scope
over
of the
violence,
intelligence breach
and it works.
identify all
In 2
personnel
years,
who might
Academy
have been involved.
graduates have
The
prevented
evidence
17
was
terrorist
comprehensive,
attacks,
but the investigation
rescued
would
43
require
kidnap
patience,
victims,
skill,
and
the
identified
same
over
attention to
100
detail
embedded
that
foreign
had characterized
assets,
Admiral
all
Thompson's
without firing a
entire
single
career.
shot or making
As
a
the color
single
ceremony
headline.
concluded
Ghosts
and
indeed,
Pearl Harbor
the
settled
president
into
murmured.
evening watch
What do you need
rotations,
from me?
Admiral Thompson
Nothing.
remained
The less
in the
official
analysis
attention we
center,
receive,
surrounded
the more
by
effective
evidence
we
of
become.
betrayal,
But
ghosts
confident
work
in the
best
knowledge
when no
that
one believes
American
they
defensive
exist.
capabilities
That
remain
evening,
strong
Helen stood
and
in the mess
effective.
hall where it
The
all
fluorescent
began.
lights cast
It had been
harsh
renovated
shadows
after
across
the
classified
incident,
documents
but
spread
she'd
before
insisted
her.
on keeping
Each
one
page
thing.
representing
The spot
months
where
of
Jake had shoved
painstaking
her
intelligence
was marked with a
gathering
small
by hostile
plaque that read,
forces who had
"Every
somehow gained
transformation
access to her
begins
most
with
sensitive
choice."
work.
Jake found
Commander
her there,
Davis
holding
approached
2
her
cups of
workstation,
coffee, carrying a
Colombian
steaming cup of coffee,
single origin,
and a thick
just
folder
how
of
you like
preliminary
it.
analysis
They stood in
reports.
comfortable silence.
Admiral,
Teacher and
we've
student,
identified
past
at
and
least
future.
47
Do you ever
separate
regret
classified
it?
documents
Jake asked.
that were compromised.
Coming out of hiding,
the level of detail
I regret that it
suggests
took
the
me
source had
15
long-term
years to realize
access to
hiding
multiple
wasn't
secure
living.
databases.
Your grandfather tried to
Admiral
tell me
Thompson
in his
accepted
letters,
the coffee
but
gratefully,
I wasn't ready
noting
to hear
that
it.
Davis had prepared
He
it
wrote to you
exactly as she preferred.
every month for
black,
15
no
years.
sugar.
I never
hot
replied,
enough to
but
cut through
he
the
kept writing,
exhaustion that
telling
was
me about
beginning
you,
to settle
about
over
your
her
sister,
after the
about
day's
the
intense
world moving
operations.
forward.
She opened the
He knew
folder
I was alive.
and began
He
reviewing
was
the
the
only
analysis.
one who
Her
never
trained eye
doubted.
immediately
Jake
recognizing
pulled out a
patterns
worn
that
envelope.
suggested
He left
systematic
this for
document
you.
collection
Mom gave
over
it to
an
me after
extended
she heard
period.
about the
Commander,
academy.
the temporal
She said
distribution
Grandpa
of these
made her promise
documents
to
is
deliver it if you
significant.
ever surfaced.
Look at the acquisition dates.
Helen opened
They
it with
span
trembling
14
hands.
months. But with
Inside
clear
was a
gaps
photo.
during periods
Tim
when
Morrison's
security
team from
protocols
Bosnia,
were enhanced.
with Helen at the
Davis
center,
leaned over her
and a
shoulder
simple
to
note.
examine the timeline she was
You were
constructing.
never just a ghost.
Ma'am,
You
that
were our
suggests
light in the
source
darkness.
knew about
Time
security
to shine
upgrades
again.
and adjusted their
Tim.
collection methods
He
accordingly.
loved you, Jake said
Exactly.
simply.
We're not dealing with
romantically,
opportunistic
but as a warrior
espionage
loves
or a
their
single
commander,
instance of
with
document
absolute
theft.
trust and
This
respect.
represents sustained
I loved him
intelligence
too,
gathering
Helen
by someone
admitted.
with
All of
detailed
them.
knowledge of our
That's why
security
losing them
procedures
broke something
and the
in me
ability
that
to
took
adapt their
15
methods
years to
when
heal.
those procedures
But you
changed.
did heal. The implication sent a chill
I learned
through
to
both
function
officers.
despite the break.
If the
There's a
intelligence
difference.
breach had been
But
ongoing
teaching,
for more
building
than a
this
year,
academy,
the scope of
watching you all
compromised transform
transform
could
that's
extend
been
better
far
than healing.
beyond Pearl
It's been
Harbor's
purpose.
defensive systems.
A knock at the door
Pacific Fleet
interrupted them.
operations,
Maria
strategic
Santos
planning
entered with Derek
documents,
Chen
and personnel
the other
records
original
might
7,
all have been
now
accessed
all
by
instructors
hostile
or instructor
forces.
candidates.
Admiral Thompson
Ma'am,
stood
Maria
and walked
said
to the
formally,
secure computer
then broke into
terminal
a grin.
that had been set up for
We
her
wanted to thank
investigation.
you. Her
2
fingers
years
moved
ago,
across the
we were
keyboard
bullies
with
who shoved
practiced
an old
efficiency
woman
as she accessed
Today we're
databases
protectors
that required
that
her
transformation
personal
is because of
authorization
you.
codes.
Systems
Helen shook
that
her
few
head.
people even
The
knew
transformation
existed,
was your
much
choice.
less had permission
I
to
just
use.
provided the
Commander,
opportunity.
I'm going to conduct
Still,
a comprehensive
Derek added,
audit of
holding up
access
a small
logs for
box.
all classified
We got you
systems
something.
related to
Inside
Pacific
was a
Fleet
new
defensive
challenge
technologies.
One
This will
side
take
showed
several
the Ghost
hours,
Protocol
but it
Academy
should identify
insignia,
every person
shadow
who had the
protecting a
opportunity
flame.
to collect
The other side had
documents.
7 names.
As Admiral
The original
Thompson began her
students,
systematic
surrounding
analysis,
a simple inscription.
Chief Williams knocked
From
softly
darkness,
on the analysis
light.
center door.
At
Helen
Davis's
held the coin
invitation,
tightly.
he
Emotion
entered and
threatening
approached
to
their
overwhelm
workstation
her usual
with
control.
obvious respect for the sensitive nature
of their investigation.
There's more, Jake
Admiral,
said.
Williams said.
The Pentagon
Ma'am,
approved
I've
your
completed
teaching
the
methodology
debriefing
for
sessions
all
with
special
all civilian
operations
personnel
training.
who were present
The Ghost
during the
Protocol
attack.
is now standard
They've been
across
provided
all
with
branches.
appropriate security
And,
guidance
Maria
and
added,
released to
they're
continue their
creating a
visits
permanent
or
position.
return to their hotels.
Director of Asymmetric
Admiral Thompson
Warfare
looked
Training.
up from her computer
It's
screen.
yours if you
her
want it.
expression
Helen
showing
looked
both
at each of
gratitude
them.
and concern.
These Marines who had begun as her
Chief,
tormentors and
how are they
became her
handling the
legacy.
experience?
I'm a
This
janitor
morning
who
was
teaches on the
considerably
side.
more intense
I
than a
don't need
typical
titles.
memorial visit.
But we need
Ma'am,
you,
they're
Jake
remarkably
said.
resilient.
The military needs
Several
you.
of the veterans
The
in
country
the group
needs
expressed
you.
pride at
Helen was
witnessing
about to
American
respond when
military
Dimitri burst
personnel
in,
successfully
moving faster
defending
than she'd
Pearl
seen him
Harbor.
move in months.
They understand
We
the
have a
historical
problem,
significance
a big
of what happened
problem.
today. He handed her a
comment brought a
satellite
slight
phone.
smile to
On the
Admiral
other end was a
Thompson's
voice
face.
she hadn't heard
The tourists
in
who
30
had come to
years.
honor Pearl Harbor's
Hello,
history
Phantom
had instead
6,
become
the
witnesses
voice
to a
in
new
accent
chapter in that
English.
history.
Or
The
should I
successful
say,
defense of the
Instructor
base
Carter,
against sophisticated
Helen's
21st
blood
century
ran
threats
cold.
using technologies
Nikolai,
and tactics
you're supposed
that
to be
built
dead,
upon 80 years
as are
of
you.
military innovation.
But here we are.
Chief Williams,
Two ghosts
please
still
ensure
haunting
that
the
all
world.
civilian
I have
personnel
something you
receive
want.
follow-up contact
43
information.
children, if
Ages
any of
7
them
to
experience
12,
stress reactions,
familiar ages,
or
yes.
have questions about
You have
today's
72
events,
hours to
I want
come
them to
alone,
have access
or
to
history
appropriate
repeats
support
itself.
resources.
The line
Yes,
went
ma'am.
dead. Helen
Admiral,
stood frozen
if I
for
may
a
ask,
moment,
what's
then
your
began
assessment
moving
of the
with purpose.
investigation so
Morrison,
far?
contact the Pentagon.
Admiral Thompson
Tell them
gestured
Ghost
toward the
Protocol is
documents
going
spread
active.
across her workstation.
Santos,
I need
Chief,
satellite
we're dealing
imagery
with a
of
level of
everything within
intelligence
500
compromise
miles
that
of the
represents one of
coordinates
the
I'm about
most
to give you.
serious security
Chen,
breaches in Pacific
hack into
Fleet
every
history.
database you
The
can.
good news
and
is that our
find out
defensive
how
systems
Nikolai
performed
Volkov
exactly as
survived.
designed, and
Volkov,
the attack was defeated
Dimitri's face was
decisively.
pale.
The concerning
brother
news
is
that
alive,
someone with
apparently
extensive
so,
access to
Helen said
classified
grimly,
information
and he's
has been
recreating
systematically
Bosnia to
collecting
draw me
intelligence
out.
for more
You
than a
can't
year.
go alone.
Jake
Williams
protested.
studied the timeline
That's what he
Admiral Thompson
expects.
had constructed.
No.
Helen
His
smiled
experienced
coldly.
eye recognizing
He expects
the methodical
Phantom 6
nature
to come
of the
alone,
intelligence
but I'm
collection.
not Phantom 6
Ma'am,
anymore.
the pattern
I'm Instructor
suggests
Carter,
someone with routine
and instructors
access
never
rather
go
than a
anywhere without
one-time
their
infiltrator.
students.
She looked at
That's
the
my
original
assessment
7,
as well,
now
Chief.
trained.
We're looking for
capable,
someone
and
who has
ready.
been in position to
Lessons
collect
are
these
over.
documents
Time
over
for
an
an
extended
exam.
period without arousing
What's the exam?
suspicion.
Maria
As the
asked,
evening
though
progressed,
she already
additional
knew the
personnel
answer.
arrived at the
We're going to
analysis
save
center to
43
support the
children,
investigation.
capture or
Petty
eliminate
Officer
an
Johnson
international
brought
trafficking
detailed
ring
security logs
and
from the
proved that
VCC,
ghosts don't work alone
documenting
anymore.
every person
We
who had
work as a
accessed the
team.
facility during the
Jake
past
stepped
6
forward.
months.
All of us?
Sergeant Rodriguez
All of us.
contributed
Plus
surveillance
70 more
footage from
graduates I'm
multiple
calling in.
checkpoints.
Nikolai
Providing
expects
visual
one
confirmation
ghost.
of
He's getting
personnel
100
movements during critical
Dimitri's
periods.
hands were clenched into
Admiral,
fists. Johnson
my brother,
reported.
I
We've
thought he died
identified
in
12
Chechnya.
individuals
So did
who had
everyone.
access to
But he's
all
been
the
building a new
compromised
network,
systems,
learning
during
from
the
Hydra's
time frame
mistakes.
you specified.
This is his coming
6
out party.
Our current
Using
active
children as
duty
bait
personnel.
to draw out the one
3 are
person who
civilian
stopped him
contractors
before.
with
Then
appropriate
we stop him
clearances.
again.
Jake
2
said firmly.
are retired
Helen
military
looked at each of them
personnel with
this won't be
consulting
training.
arrangements.
This will be
and
real
one is
combat. Some of you
Johnson
might not
paused,
come home.
his expression
with
showing
respect, ma'am,
reluctance to
Maria
continue.
said.
Petty
We didn't
Officer
come home
Johnson,
2 years ago
complete your
either.
report.
We came home different.
Ma'am, one
Better.
is a flag
because
officer
of you
who has been conducting
now it's our
periodic
turn
security
to pay that
assessments
forward.
of Pacific Fleet installations.
Over the next 24
the revelation
hours,
hung
Camp
in the air
Pendleton
like smoke
became
from
a
a
staging
signal flare
ground for the largest
Admiral Thompson
gathering
felt her
of
blood
Ghost
run
Protocol
cold
graduates
as she
in the
realized that her
Academy's
own
short
security
history.
assessment activities
They came from
could potentially
every
make
base,
her appear to
every
be the
branch,
source of the
dropping
intelligence
everything
breach.
to answer the
Someone
call.
with access to
Helena
her
Patterson
investigation
arrived with her
methods
mother Anna.
could have used her
Both
legitimate
insisting on
security
joining the
reviews as
operation.
cover for systematic
Those children could be
collection.
me. Anna
Commander
said simply.
Davis,
Admiral
I can't
Thompson
sit this
said
out.
slowly.
The
I
Pentagon
need you
initially
to conduct
resisted,
a complete
wanting to
audit
send
of my
conventional
own
forces,
access to
but Helen
classified
stood
systems.
firm. During the
Conventional
past 14
forces will
months,
get those children
if
killed.
someone has been using
This
my
requires
security
ghosts,
assessment activities
people who can
as cover
operate
for
in darkness
espionage
without
we need
technology,
to identify
without
exactly
support,
how they did
without
it.
making a
Davis
sound.
nodded.
General
Understanding
Anderson
the difficult
finally
position
agreed.
Admiral
What do you
Thompson
need?
found herself in.
Transport to these
her
coordinates.
extensive knowledge
Helen
of
showed
Pearl
him a
Harbor's
map.
defensive
Then
systems,
nothing.
her
No
access
oversight,
to classified
no
protocols,
interference,
and
no
her presence at the
extraction
base during
plan.
the attack.
We
could all
go
be
in as
interpreted
ghosts,
as
we
evidence
come
of
out as
involvement,
ghosts,
rather
or
than
we don't
coincidence.
come out at all.
Admiral,
48
we'll
hours
conduct that
later,
audit immediately.
102 Academy
Ma'am,
graduates
for what it's
stood
worth,
in a warehouse
your actions
5
today
miles from
demonstrated
Nikolai's
absolute
compound.
loyalty
Helen
to
had spent
American
the day
military
planning,
personnel
using every
and
skill from
installations.
40 years of experience.
Commander, investigations
He has
must be
60
based on
operatives,
evidence,
not
not
personal impressions.
All former special
If the
forces
facts
from
suggest
various
my
countries,
involvement,
the children
those
are
facts
held in
must be
3 separate
thoroughly
buildings
examined
to
regardless
regardless
of
of
personal
personal
relationships.
He expects
or
me to come through
professional
the
respect.
main gate, probably
The
with a
integrity
small
of Admiral
team.
Thompson's
So,
response
we don't
impressed
use the gate,
everyone
Jake
present.
suggested.
Even
We
facing
don't use any
potential
traditional
suspicion
approach,
herself,
Helen
she
confirmed.
remained committed to
We
conducting
become
a
the
thorough
night
and
itself.
objective
The
investigation
operation began
that would
at
follow the
0200
evidence wherever
hours.
it led.
No night
As
vision,
midnight
no
approached,
radios,
the analysis
no
team had
technology
constructed
that
a
could be
comprehensive
detected or
picture
jammed.
of the
Just
intelligence
humans
breach
trained and
its
navigate darkness
implications.
using
Tune,
the compromised
smell, and
documents
instinct.
represented a systematic
Jake led
effort
Alpha
to
Team,
understand
20
Pearl
graduates,
Harbor's
including
defensive
Maria and
capabilities,
Derek,
toward
with
the
particular
first
focus on the
They
advanced
moved like
systems
liquid
Admiral
shadow,
Thompson
using
had developed
techniques
during
Helen
her
had drilled
active
into
duty
them for
career.
2 years.
Admiral
Davis
Dimitri led
reported,
Bravo Team to
"We've
the second
identified
building.
patterns
His
in the
tracking
document
skills
collection
reversed to
that
become
suggest the
infiltration
source was
expertise.
specifically targeting
His
your
team included
classified
Helena
technologies,
Patterson,
whose use
someone
was
wanted
balanced by
detailed
exceptional
information
training.
about your defensive
Helen led
innovations
Charlie Team
and
to
the
the third
protocols you
building
developed
and the
for
main
Pacific Fleet
compound where Nikolai
installations.
waited.
Admiral
With her were
Thompson
the most
absorbed this
experienced
information
graduates,
while
those who would
continuing to
master
review
not just
access
physical
logs and
skills,
security
but the mental
records.
discipline
The
to
evidence
face
was
a
pointing
legend.
toward a
The guards
conclusion
never
that she
heard
had
them coming.
suspected, but
Academy
hoped to
training
avoid.
emphasized
Someone had
non-lethal
specifically
takedowns
targeted
whenever
whenever
possible,
possible,
for
and the
systematic
graduates
intelligence
executed them
collection
perfectly.
and eventual
Pressure
use against
points,
American
blood
military
chokes, nerve
installations.
strikes,
Guards
Commander,
dropped
the targeting was
without
too precise
understanding
to be
what had
coincidental.
happened.
Jake's
Someone
team
identified
found
my
15
technologies
children in
as
the first building,
particularly
terrified
valuable
but
intelligence.
unharmed.
They
and
began
developed a
evacuation
comprehensive
procedures.
plan to acquire
Each graduate
detailed
assigned
information about
specific
their
children
capabilities
to guide
and
through the
vulnerabilities.
Dimitri's
Ma'am,
team
that
discovered
suggests
14
the intelligence
children
breach
in the
was
second
directed
building,
by
but also a
sophisticated
surprise.
adversaries with
3 of
detailed
Nikolai's
knowledge
men
of
were
American
actually
defensive
undercover
systems
Interpol
and their
agents who
development
infiltrated
history.
the organization.
The scope of the
They
conspiracy
immediately
was
switched
becoming
sides
clear.
when they realized
This
what
wasn't
was happening.
opportunistic
Ghost
espionage by
protocol?
individual
One
bad
whispered in
actors,
amazement.
but rather a
We thought you
coordinated
were a
intelligence
myth.
operation.
We are,
designed to
Dimitri
compromise
replied.
specific
You
American
never
defensive
saw us.
technologies.
Helen's
and
team
used them
encountered
against
the
the
heaviest
installations
resistance.
they were meant
Nikolai
to
had
protect.
positioned his best
Admiral
operatives
Thompson
around the main
stood and walked to the
compound,
secure
but Helen had taught her
communications
students
console
well.
that connected
They
the
used the
analysis
darkness
center
like a
with
weapon,
senior
creating
Pacific Fleet
confusion,
commanders.
misdirection.
The investigation had
fear.
reached a point where her findings
She
needed
found
to be
Nikolai in the
reported to
command
highest
center,
levels of
watching
military
monitors that
leadership.
showed nothing but
Admiral
darkness
Hawkins,
and unconscious
she said,
guards.
as the secure connection
He was older,
established.
scarred,
This is
but
Admiral
still
Thompson
dangerous.
at Pearl Harbor.
Hello,
Sir,
brother.
I need to provide you
Dimitri
with a
said from
priority
behind him.
intelligence briefing
Nikolai
regarding
spun,
today's attack
shocked.
and our investigation
Dimitri,
findings.
you're with her?
Admiral Thompson,
I'm with them.
good to hear your voice.
Dimitri gestured
We've
to the
been
shadows,
monitoring the
where
situation
graduates stood
throughout the
ready.
day.
The world
Outstanding
changed
work
while you
defending
were
Pearl
hiding,
Harbor.
Nikolai.
Thank
Lone
you, sir.
wolves are extinct.
Admiral Hawkins,
Only packs
our
survive
investigation
now.
has revealed a systematic intelligence
Nikolai
breach
sneered.
targeting
But I still have
specific
14
defensive
children in the
technologies
basement,
across multiple
wired with
Pacific Fleet
explosives.
installations.
Your ghosts make
the attack
one
on
wrong
Pearl
move
Harbor
and
appears to have been a
and
test
nothing,
case
Helen
for using
interrupted.
compromised
We
American
found them 20
technologies
minutes
against
ago.
their creators.
Delta Team, trained
Admiral
specifically
Thompson,
in EOD,
what's your
disarmed
assessment
your
of the broader
devices while
threat?
you were watching empty
Sir,
monitors.
if the
Nikolai's
same intelligence
face showed
collection
the exact
methods have been
moment he
used against
understood.
other
He
installations,
wasn't facing Phantom
we
6.
may be facing
He was
a
facing an
coordinated
entire
campaign
academy
to
of
neutralize
ghosts.
American defensive
Impossible.
capabilities
I
using
plan
our own
for everything.
technologies.
You
I
plan for the
recommend
past,
immediate
Helen
security
said.
assessments,
But
at
we're the
all
future.
major Pacific Fleet
Morrison,
facilities.
show him.
The conversation
Jake stepped
continued
from
for
the
another
shadows
20
with the
minutes
14
as Admiral
children from the
Thompson
basement,
provided
each
detailed
safely
briefings
escorted
on the
by a
investigation
graduate.
findings.
All 43
the
children
defensive
were
systems
accounted
that
for,
had been compromised,
safe,
and the
being
protocols that
evacuated
had
to medical
successfully
facilities.
defeated the attack.
Nikolai reached
For
for his
recommendations,
weapon, but
Helen
would
was
influence
faster,
Pacific Fleet
not with
security
violence,
procedures,
but with
for
words.
years to come.
47
After
of your men are
concluding her
unconscious
briefing with
but
Admiral
alive.
Hawkins,
3 were undercover
Admiral Thompson
agents.
returned to
that
the
leaves
analysis
10
center to
unaccounted for.
find her
She
investigation
paused.
team.
They
conducting
surrendered to
final
Sandra's
reviews
team
of the
15
evidence
minutes ago
and
when they
preparing
realized they were
comprehensive
surrounded by
reports.
shadows they
The
couldn't
work was
fight.
methodical,
You're lying.
thorough,
Maria's
and would
voice
provide
came
the
from Nikolai's
foundation
own
for
radio.
security improvements
Actually, she's
throughout
not.
the Pacific Fleet.
Your men are quite
Admiral,
talkative once
Chief
they
Williams
realized
said,
we weren't
approaching
here to
her
kill them.
workstation,
just to
Ma'am,
stop them. I've been thinking
Nikolai
about
looked
the
at his
timing
brother.
of your
You
visit to
betrayed
Pearl
your
Harbor
blood for
today.
this American.
Admiral Thompson
chose
looked
to
at him with an
teach
expression
instead
that
of
encouraged
destroy,
him to continue.
Dimitri
Ma'am,
replied.
you arrived
I
at
chose
Pearl
to
Harbor
build
carrying
instead of
surveillance
break.
equipment that
I chose
detected the
family
electronic
over blood.
anomalies preceding the attack.
The takedown was
You were
anticlimactic.
conducting a security
Nikolai
assessment
simply gave
that
up,
identified
understanding he'd
vulnerabilities
been
in our
outmaneuvered
visitors
not by
screening
superior
procedures.
force, but
and
by
you were present
superior
when hostile
strategy.
forces
By an
attempted to
enemy he
exploit
couldn't
the very
see,
systems
couldn't
you
predict,
had created to
couldn't
defend
fight.
the base. As local
Chief,
authorities
what's your
arrived to
assessment of
process
those
the prisoners
coincidences?
and care for the children,
Admiral, I don't
Helen
believe
stood
they were
with her
coincidences.
students, her family.
I think someone
watching
wanted
the
you here
sunrise.
today.
Wanted you
That
to
was
witness
too
the
easy,
attack,
Jake
and
said
wanted you to see
suspiciously.
your own technologies
Helen
being
laughed.
used against Pearl
We just
Harbor.
coordinated
The
102
theory was disturbing
operators
but
in
plausible.
complete darkness.
If Admiral
With
Thompson's
no
investigation
technology
had been
against 60
compromised,
hostiles,
hostile
holding
forces might have
43
deliberately
hostages.
timed their attack
That wasn't
to coincide
easy.
with her
It was
security
impossible.
assessment. But you
The
did
psychological
it anyway.
impact of
We
forcing
did
her
it,
to
Maria
defend Pearl
corrected.
Harbor
All
against
of us,
her own stolen
including
technologies
could have been part of
especially
their
you,
operational planning.
Derek added.
Chief
You
Williams
taught us that darkness
that's an
isn't
interesting
something to
assessment.
fear, but
if
something
you are
to
correct,
understand.
it suggests the
Helena
intelligence
Patterson
breach
approached
includes
with her
real-time
mother,
information
Anna.
about
The children
my
are asking about the
investigation
shadows
activities
that saved
and my
them.
schedule for
What should we tell
security
them?
assessments.
Helen thought for a
Ma'am,
moment.
it would
Tell
also
them that
explain
guardian
why the
angels don't
attack was
always
designed
have
to
wings.
showcase the compromised
Sometimes they're just
technologies
people who
rather
learn
than
to walk
simply
in
disable
darkness
Pearl
so
Harbor's
others can stay
defenses
in the light.
through more conventional
Anna hugged
methods.
Helen tightly.
Admiral
Thank
Thompson
you.
considered the
Again,
implications
for
of Williams'
everything.
theory while reviewing
As they
the
prepared to
timeline of
leave,
events.
Dimitri approached
the
his
attack
brother
had
one
indeed
last
been
time.
designed to demonstrate
Nikolai
the
was in
effectiveness
custody,
of stolen
facing life
American
in prison.
technologies.
Why?
Almost
almost as if
Dimitri
someone
asked.
wanted to prove that
We were
Pearl Harbor's
soldiers,
defenses
heroes.
could be turned against
How did you
themselves.
become this?
Chief, your
Nikolai's
analysis
answer was
suggests
simple
that
and
today's
terrible.
attack was
I
as
never
much about
stopped being a
psychological
soldier.
warfare
I just
as it was
chose the
about
wrong
testing
war.
military capabilities.
Dimitri turned away, but
Yes,
Helen
ma'am.
stopped him.
Someone
He
wanted to
made his
prove that
choice.
even the most
You made yours.
sophisticated American
Don't carry
defensive
his darkness.
systems could be
Wise
compromised
words from someone
and
who
used
carried
against their
darkness for
creators.
15 years.
The investigation
Which is
continued
how I
through
know
the
it's
early
not
morning
worth it.
hours, as Admiral
Next week's
Thompson's
story
team
features a
compiled
nurse who was
evidence,
fired unfairly,
analyzed
only to
intelligence
have a Black
patterns,
Hawk helicopter
and
land
prepared
on the hospital
recommendations
roof
for enhanced
with Admiral
security
seeking her
procedures.
specifically.
The work was
You won't want to miss
painstaking,
what
but
happens
crucial
when
for
hidden valor
preventing
is finally
similar attacks
revealed.
against other
The
Pacific
flight
Fleet
back to Camp
installations.
Pendleton was quiet.
As dawn
Each graduate
approached,
processed
Admiral
what they
Thompson
just
found
accomplished.
herself reflecting
No
on the
casualties,
extraordinary
no
events of the
fatalities,
past 24
43
hours.
children saved.
She had arrived at
It was
Pearl
the kind of
Harbor as a
operation that
retired
would never
admiral
make
conducting
headlines,
routine
but would
security
ripple through the
assessments,
intelligence community
been
for
detained as a
years.
potential security
General
threat,
Anderson met them at the
witnessed a
airfield.
sophisticated attack
Outstanding
on the base
work.
she had spent her
All of
career
you.
protecting,
Just doing what
and
we
led
were
the
trained to
successful
do,
defense
Jake
using
replied.
systems she had
No,
created
Anderson
decades
corrected.
earlier. You did something
Admiral,
that's never been
Commander
done before.
Davis said,
A completely dark
approaching her
operation
with the final
with over
investigation
100
reports.
operators and perfect
We've
coordination.
completed our analysis.
You've proven that the
Ghost
evidence
protocol
clearly
works on a
indicates
scale we
systematic
never imagined.
intelligence collection
Helen stepped
by
forward,
someone with
then
extensive
expanded
access to
every
classified
base,
systems,
every branch.
But we've found no
Not to
evidence
create an elite
suggesting
unit,
your
but to
involvement
ensure
in the
that every
breach.
service member
Admiral
can
Thompson
operate when the
accepted the
lights go
reports
out.
with relief
That would
and
require
satisfaction.
thousands of instructors.
The investigation
Helen
had been
gestured to her
thorough,
graduates.
objective,
You're looking
and
at
would
them.
provide the
Each one
foundation
can teach
for
what they've
enhanced
learned.
security procedures
Exponential
throughout
growth.
the Pacific Fleet.
Within 5 years,
Commander
you could
Davis,
have 100,000
excellent
ghosts.
These findings will help protect
100,000?
American
Anderson looked
military
skeptical.
installations
Why not?
from similar attacks
Every
in the
Marine,
future.
soldier, sailor,
Ma'am,
and
what happens
airman
next?
who can navigate darkness.
Next, we implement the
support
lessons
staff
learned
member
from
who can
today's
recognize
events.
threats.
We update
Every
security
person on every
protocols,
base capable
enhance
of protecting
defensive
themselves,
systems,
and
ensure
ensure
that
that when
Pacific
technology
Fleet personnel
fails,
are prepared for
that
the
would
kinds of
fundamentally change
sophisticated
the
threats
military
we
doctrine.
encountered today.
Good, Helen said firmly.
As Admiral Thompson
Doctrine
prepared
needs
to transition
changing.
from
We're
crisis
preparing for the
response
last
to
war
long-term
while our
security
enemies
planning,
prepare for the
she
next
reflected
one.
on the
The
broader
Ghost
significance
protocol
of Pearl
prepares for
Harbor's
all
successful
wars.
defense.
The ones fought
The
with
attack had
million-dollar
failed
missiles
because American
and the ones
military
fought with
with bare
bare
hands
had
and
demonstrated
pitch
the
darkness.
same qualities
Over the
that had
following
protected
months,
the base
Helen's
for
vision began to
generations.
materialize.
Vigilance,
The success of the
competence,
Nikolai
adaptability,
operation had proven
and
that
courage.
Ghost Protocol
The
wasn't
threats
just
were
about
indeed
individual
evolving,
excellence,
as Admiral
but
Thompson had
collective
predicted during
capability.
her strategic planning
Jake Morrison
years
took
earlier.
over as lead
But
instructor
America's
when Helen
capacity
stepped
to
back
meet
to an
those
advisory
threats
role.
was evolving as
He
well.
brought his grandfather's
Driven
wisdom,
by the dedication
combined with
of
modern
military
personnel,
personnel, creating
who
a training
understood that the
program
defense of
that was
freedom
both timeless
required
and
constant
cutting
vigilance
edge.
and
My grandfather
continuous
once told me,
improvement.
Jake
Looking
said
out the
during his
window of
first
the
address
analysis
to new
center
students,
toward Pearl Harbor's
that courage
historic
isn't
memorials,
about being fearless.
Admiral Thompson
It's
could
about
see
being
the first
afraid
light
of
of
dawn,
acting anyway,
reflecting off the
in the
water.
darkness.
The sunrise
we're all
marked
afraid.
not just the end of a long
But
night
together,
of investigation,
we act.
but the beginning of a new
Maria
chapter
Santos
in
developed
Pacific
the
Fleet
acoustic
security.
training program into
The
a
attack
full
on Pearl
curriculum,
Harbor had
teaching
been
students
defeated by
to
the
use
same
sound as both
combination
weapon
of
and
technology,
shield.
training,
Her techniques
and
would
courage
eventually
that
be
had
adopted
protected
by
the base
NASA
for
for
generations.
astronaut training
The
and
threats were
sensory
evolving,
isolation.
but America's
Derek
capacity
Chen
to meet
created
those
an
threats
integration
was evolving
protocol
as well.
that allowed Ghost
Standards
Protocol
maintained
training
through
to
discipline,
complement rather
respect
than
earned
replace
through
technological
service.
advancement. We don't reject technology.
The
he
stories
explained.
end here,
We transcend
but the
dependence on
journey
it.
continues.
Helena
Many
Patterson,
new
at 20,
episodes
became
are
the
waiting
youngest
for
senior
you.
instructor,
And if you
specializing in
enjoy,
training teenage
please take a
dependents of
moment
military
to
families.
like, subscribe
Security
to
starts at
our
home,
EV
she
Story
argued.
channel,
If our
and
families can
turn on the bell.
recognize and respond
See
to
you
threats,
in the next
our
story.
bases become